They can return from a fearful succession of murder, arson, rape, and torture with the same joy in their hearts, the same contentment in their souls, as if they had indulged in some student's rag. When a man is capable of commanding, when he is by nature a master, when he is violent in an act of gesture, of what importance are treaties to him? To judge morality properly, it must be replaced by two concepts borrowed from zoology: the taming of the beast and the breeding of specific species. Friedrich Nietzsche.
Have you ever wondered how so much evil persists in this world? How we never seem to be without divisiveness, conflict, violence, and war? Have you ever wondered how things seem to progressively become more depressing and ominous? After all, with all of our knowledge, philosophy, technology, and love, how hasn't humanity progressed significantly past the Attila the Hun-style rape and plunder of the world? Oh sure, we may have a better spin on that now to sell it to the people, but to those on the receiving end of this violence, I can assure you, nothing has changed for them.
Come on. Clear. Clear. Orange.
Any rational look at all of the political corruption, church scandals, corporate crimes, organized crime, censorship, war crimes, asset seizures, Ponzi schemes, terrorism, drug trafficking, famine, segregation, slavery, kidnapping, prostitution, revolutions, coups, torture, apartheid, confiscations, persecutions, mass sterilizations, purges, economic depressions, inflations, forced migrations, crusades, genocides, wars, and quite frankly, any major societal upheaval throughout all of human history all has the exact same formula. The sick part is that humanity seems completely blind to, or afraid to, recognize this formula, and that is why it persists. Please note that it does not matter how large or small it is, or what age, race, religion, ideology, or technology. When humanity has this formula, it will transcend everything. This formula is the greatest truth never told. Here is the simple formula for all of the misery in the world throughout all of human history. Collective populations plus hierarchical structure plus power-hungry psychopaths equals human misery. All forms of human misery come from these three elements seamlessly interacting throughout history. Any collective population organizes itself into a hierarchical power structure where there is a chain of command that the masses submit to. This could be anything from a homeowners association to a church, a small business, a school, corporation, a military, or a government. No matter how pure of intention or honorable the motive behind the people or organization, inevitably, over time, an element arises inside that organization that seeks to control those inside of that organization, either for power or profit. There are only two kinds of people in this world: those that want to be left alone, and those that won't leave you alone. Those people that won't leave you alone are hurt people that seek to hurt others or control others to prevent themselves from being hurt again. They have psychopathic tendencies and thrive in centralized structures of power where their sole focus is gaining power over those below them. Anyone that has spent any time in any organization finds that over time that pushy, conniving, ass-kissing, cutthroat, intimidating, or driven people that put their lust for power over their relationships in their lives step all the way to the top. They are the most willing to make the unsocial moves to attain power and even intimidate or manipulate others on their way to attaining power. The ends justify the means in their mind, and if they have to step on a few faces to get to the top, oh well, they'll still sleep very well at night. Once at the top of any centralized organization, they seek to bend the rules to secure power and profit. They bring in those that show the same psychopathic tendencies to change the culture of the organization and to justify any action they might take. Secrecy, compartmentalization, propaganda, they all become more important than the values that made the organization successful in the first place. Once these three elements of human misery are in place, it is vital for those at the top to spread some story, mission, declaration, vision, or lie to the collective below them, to sacrifice their time, energy, talents, and money to those at the top of the pyramid. This could come in the form of working extra unpaid hours at some big box store, or investors in a Ponzi scheme, or campaign volunteers, or a corporate career, or an enlistment into the military, or simply believing in the American dream itself. The single most successful military recruiting poster of all time is the I Want You poster featuring Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam initials US, is a common national personification of the American government. This Santa Claus character of the American dream has been used for generations to get young men and women to willingly sacrifice themselves for a lie that they are somehow defending our freedoms and spreading democracy. Any objective look back on the past decades shows not one example of that lie. We do not support freedom anywhere. We have the world's largest military that secures the human and natural resources of other nations for our corporations to harvest. Their profits are funneled through the banking centers that then rig the political game to make sure no one challenges the rigged game that they gain power and profit from. We certainly do not support freedom here at home when our constitutional rights are being stolen while the wealth is being sucked up to those at the top. Military men are dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns for foreign policy. Former Secretary of the State and Nobel Peace Prize winner Henry Kissinger.
Shit! I'm hit! I'm hit!
There's just some people don't fit well into a highly skilled market-based economy. They're perfectly decent citizens. We'll send them off to Afghanistan, but they are not going to command a big price. You still want them to get the most out of their abilities, but if their abilities leave them unable to earn much more than the poverty level, we ought to do something additional for them. We've got to do something. Off to Afghanistan.
I'm hit! I'm hit!
Send them off to Afghanistan.
I'm hit!
Send them off to Afghanistan.
I'm hit!
Send them off to Afghanistan. We'll send them off to Afghanistan.
I'm hit!
We'll send them off to Afghanistan.
We are an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you'll study that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how these things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be just left to study what we do. Karl Rove. We are an empire. We are the largest and most powerful one the world has ever seen. Logic would dictate that we must also have the most powerful propaganda in order to bring about that power. While it once started out as the greatest experiment in human freedom with a constitutional republic, it has been subtly and systematically destroyed from within, to the point that we can hardly tell the difference between our nation today and the fascists and the socialists that we fought against in World War II. The Constitution has been gutted from both parties, so much so that it looks like a redacted top-secret document. Even the goodwill, wealth, and sacrifice from the greatest generation has been destroyed by the spoiled generations that have followed, that have never known true sacrifice or even hard times. We have blown through the greatest gift of freedom and the greatest inheritance the world has ever seen. The worst part is we still believe in the illusion of what we once were.
It is vital to recognize in the formula that despite all of the efforts to indoctrinate you into fear and submission, your boss, your priest, your commander, or your president do not control you. No, they do not control you. You empower them. You are the provider of the energy in the form of your time, talent, energy, money, or blood. Those at the top do not provide any value in the organization. Think about all of those that are just killing it in this paradigm. Celebrity, the lawyers, politicians, military contractors, lobbyists, CEOs, bankers, almost all of the ones making millions of dollars a year, none of them provide any real tangible benefit to humanity. Not one of them makes the world a better place to live in any real sense, and despite their master of the universe mentality, if they disappeared from the earth, not only would we not really care, we would see that a gigantic cancer has been lifted off the back of the productive individuals that do provide real tangible benefits to humanity. Their job is to convince you to work harder for the good of the collective, that they just so happen to take a larger and larger share of the wealth. These three elements of human misery explains the wealth disparity between those at the top from those at the bottom. This is most notable when you look at the growth of CEO pay versus that of the average worker pay of those in the same company. A 2012 study looked at the increase in average worker compensation and that of the CEOs they work for, and from 1978 to 2011, the average worker increased only 5.7%. and yet the CEO compensation increased a whopping 726%. Those kinds of riches attract the worst in humanity that would think nothing of slitting a few throats on their way to the top. Once this formula is recognized, it can be disrupted at any of the inputs and forever end the cycle of violence that has plagued humanity from the dawn of time. We are moving towards this with open source technology, free flow of information with the internet, the trivium breaking years of indoctrination that will only increase with decentralized forms of wealth creation such as 3D printing and decentralized energy production. This does not mean that those cunning men at the top will give up without a fight, but a dollar collapse will surely cut the central power to all of their schemes. The beauty of this formula is that once it is consciously recognized by you, you will never look at the world the same way again. Over time, you will no longer be able to do what you've done in the past, knowing what you know now. No longer will you be able to actively or passively participate in the debt and death paradigm that empowers the worst in humanity. You will seek to focus your energy on the real skills, real friends, and real wealth around you. This refocus on your life's energy will create independence and happiness from the cancerous and doomed debt and death paradigm.
Mohandas Gandhi started his career working inside the British Empire as a barrister, or a lawyer, for many years to try to bring justice to the British subjects. It was only when he realized the system was too powerful, and that there were too many roadblocks, that there could never be change from inside the system. Gandhi, in short, became historically significant when he realized that and walked away from the system in the opposite consciousness and in peace. That was when he was able to bring real freedom to his people.
I praise such courage. I need such courage because in this cause I too am prepared to die. But my friend, there is no cause for which I am prepared to kill. Whatever they do to us, we will attack no one, kill no one, but we will not give our fingerprints, not one of us. They will imprison us, they will fine us, they will seize our possessions, but they cannot take away our self-respect if we do not give it to them.
Have you been to prison? They beat us and torture us. I say they beat us.
I am asking you to fight against their anger, not to provoke it. We will not strike a blow, but we will receive them, and through our pain, we will make them see their injustice, and it will hurt, as all fighting hurts. But we cannot lose. We cannot. They may torture my body, break my bones, even kill me. Then they will have my dead body, not my obedience.
So I asked him, I said, Dr. Paul, will you become historically significant by stating at this very unique period in history where you are no longer running for Congress and your presidential race is done, to go to the millions of people, both here and in the world, that you have spent 40 years inside the system trying to change the system from within, but that you now realize that nothing will ever change it. The game is rigged, and the only way to win the game is to not play the game at all, if you want your freedom. Don't vote, don't buy corporate products, and take your money out of the system and empower yourself and not those that seek to rig the game. I then finished with, Dr. Paul, will you become historically significant? The answer I got was, well, I've spoken about this many times, and at the end of the day, there will be de facto nullification. I have a meeting to get to, and thank you for coming in. While it is obvious to most people that there is no difference between the Republicans and Democrats, most people don't see that the alternatives out there are really to keep you stuck inside the paradigm. Some use fear to keep you stuck in the loop, and some use hope to keep you stuck in the loop. It is only when you realize that no one is coming to save you that you can stop fearing or hoping for a savior. You can start taking responsibility and empower yourself. It is only when you realize that those that you fear, their only power is the lies, the illusion, and propaganda that they get you to spend your time, effort, and money inside their rigged game. Only then can you see that you simply need to walk away from it and use your time, energy, and money to empower yourself to become independent of them. No more begging for power, just walk away. This is just like a teenager who probably only got respect from your parents when you fully became independent of their parents' paradigm and then moved outside of them to take control of yourself and your life. We too must stop begging for power. We need to walk away from their power and empower ourselves in every aspect of our lives. Stop playing the Hegelian dialectic of false choices and start looking for answers that are truly of the opposite consciousness. In this new way of thinking, you will bring forth something that resonates with you. When you do that, it will save you. If you don't do that in this paradigm shift, it will ultimately destroy you. In this paradigm, we are free to do what we're told. In the Sons of Liberty Academy, I cover the psychological control that they have over us, and that game theory by John Nash was developed towards that end. Ultimately, the system is run by psychopaths who rose to power by being so cutthroat that they will always do the unsociable thing. We know this from John Nash's work. Some of you may have seen it in The Beautiful Mind, or may know it as mutually assured destruction. But what is not well known was that when this game was played against non-psychopaths, it was never mutually assured destruction. It was that the psychopath won every time because the average empathetically healthy person could not or would not do the unsociable thing and win a game involving death. The elite have used this to keep good men in a box. Many of you have read that the best finance men in the world are ones that have mental defects, that they don't register emotional pain associated with their trades. They make cold calculated decisions and they don't care who gets hurt. This has led more and more wealth into the hands of men that are essentially the worst in humanity, and they continue to rig the game and centralize power into smaller hands. This leads two winning solutions to the rest of the world. It is said that evil genius always wins, but I say good men don't have to play their game.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.
When you see the game is rigged, recognize that and walk away from their game and their rules. Shun them. This works with toxic thoughts, relationships, investments, and careers. The second winning solution is that the game is rigged to blow as they try to sustain the unsustainable. There is no reforming the system, and quite frankly, the rot is so systemic and the lessons that need to be learned in humanity are too large. Our only job is to see where things are logically going and prepare for it. When you are aware, you can prepare. My ultimate exit strategy is to have as much real tangible assets in the hands of many good guys that we can have the capital and intellectual and moral authority to create a better, fairer, sustainable way of life and permanently break this debt and death paradigm. So I challenge you to stop the revolution in the debt and death paradigm and start the evolution in the conscious awakening of humanity. Most men live lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with their songs still in them. Henry David Thoreau. We are at a crossroads of humanity when all that we have been indoctrinated to will fail almost inexplicably. Millions of people will have their world turned upside down and have the main motivator for all their life choices, the dollar, suddenly fail them. But it will not be the financial losses or the inevitable anger and violence that they will ultimately succumb to. It will be the lost time, opportunities, and passions that they wasted chasing an illusion that did not resonate with their soul. The one permanent emotion of the inferior man is fear. Fear of the unknown, the complex, and the inexplicable. What he wants above everything else is safety. H.L. Mencken. We have been conned into the idea that a dependent man is safe and that an independent man is crazy. We sacrifice everything to an insatiable collective for the illusion of safety. We actively or passively support the debt and death paradigm with every debt, vote, view, purchase, recruitment, and career. Behind every collective has a group of scheming men that know that their lives and power depend on getting others to willingly sacrifice their time, energy, and focus for the empowerment of others. So round and round we go, from one revolution of collectivists to another group of collectivists, each promising the moon while stealing your soul. I prefer dangerous freedom to peaceful slavery. Thomas Jefferson. It is time for an evolution and not another false revolution. An evolution of consciousness happens when we realize that the battle is not in the world with aggressive competing factions. It is in our minds and in what we empower. You see, we empower them. They do not control us. We give away our power to a faceless, uncaring collective that would in a heartbeat crush any individual just to keep the lie alive. It is this reality that is at the heart of all of our problems. This is not a financial, political, military war. It is a war of consciousness, nothing more, nothing less. The notion that a radical is one that hates his country is naive and usually idiotic. He is, more likely, one who likes his country more than the rest of us, and is thus more disturbed than the rest of us when he sees it debauched. He is not a bad citizen turning to crime. He is a good citizen driven to despair. H.L. Mencken. There would be no banking crisis if your money is not in their bank. There would be no war if your men weren't fooled into surrendering their humanity. There would be no corporate giants if we did not buy their goods or their corporate careers.
That's why I'm richer than you.
There would be no federal power if we did not encourage them with our support. All collectives fear an individual walking away because without them, there is no collective. The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable. H.L. Mencken. Studies have shown, like the Milgram experiment or the Stanford prison experiment, that the average person is so indoctrinated to obey authority that the majority would cause serious harm or even kill an innocent individual so long as an authority figure told them it was okay. But what is often not shown is those exact same studies show that the answer is in individuals questioning authority and refusing to play their schemes. The more powerful and influential the voice of the dissent, the more others will listen. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. The answer has always been at our feet. We need to see the power that is within us to change our world by changing ourselves. We cannot change the outside world to make ourselves happy or free. We can only change ourselves to make the world happy and free. How can you expect a man who's warm to understand one who's cold? Alexander Solzhenitsyn. You do not have to wait for humanity to come to this reality generations from now. If you want peace, cultivate peace in your house. If you want respect, respect others. You have it in your power with every thought, relationship, investment, and action to immediately and permanently change your world. Stop listening to them with their toxic thoughts and distractions. Cut out detestable relationships that poison our lives. Get real about what wealth is and why we acquire it.
And I think that we have the power within ourselves to really put a different conscious solution out there. And I challenge all of you to stop thinking in terms of dollars and start thinking about how you can be a blessing in the next paradigm when the world is going to need our solutions.
Wealth should not be stored up like a dam. It should be a river that flows and spreads with abundance to all those that you resonate with. Instead, we've been conned into enabling the worst in our society as they whisper in our ear, there is no other way.
That's why I'm richer than you.
Well, there is another way, and it starts with you simply saying no more. Not one more debt, not one more lie, not one more death, not one more psychopath, not one more day slaving on. A vote of no confidence every day and in every way is active resistance. But resistance is not enough. You must live your life to the highest potential. There is a vitality, a life force, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And there is only one of you in all time. This expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and it will be lost. Martha Graham. Ideas and movements are best served by people walking their path in peace, rather than conflicting with others on how they should live their lives. Resonating power attracts others with their ideas and energy. The opposite consciousness of our collective problems is the individual moving to their own beat and doing things that make them happy. Far too many slave away in their little lives, bowing to little lies. It is far better to dance and be happy than sacrificing 30 of your best years to an illusionary carrot that was stolen long ago. You were well trained to sit down, don't talk, do as you're told. This is the reality of our indoctrination, in our relationships, our schools, and our jobs. Your solution is to move, speak out, and do things that are only logical. Your courage of truth will awaken something that is lost in others, and that will create a positive feedback loop that will take a life all of its own. This conscious evolution will create generational wealth as the abundance mentality empowers the best in our lives and exacts revenge on the cancerous parts of our society by simply withdrawing our energy from them. Do not go gentle into the good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas. By doing what you love and resonating with good people, this is actually the best way to find success in this and the next paradigm. There are a lot of talented people either doing things that they're not good at or feeding their life's energy to those that don't empower them. Redirecting your energy into things that come natural to you and giving that abundance to those worthy of it is the best way to get support, interest, and opportunities in your life. Adam Smith's invisible hand is simply an economic expression of those doing what comes best to them are far more productive and encouraged than those that are stuck as an indoctrinated individual forced into a collective's need. A consciously aware individual that has nothing but a passion and good friends that resonate and encourage them are going to be miles ahead of the disillusioned, closed-off, indoctrinated masses that will have everything ripped from their face. As the rest of society burns through the anger, bargaining, and depression stage of the awakening, those consciously aware individuals will be able to see the opportunities at their feet, while most of humanity will be stuck thinking about the opportunities lost. This shift in consciousness will change humanity far more than the agricultural, industrial, and communications revolutions. Every age has its particular folly, some scheme, project, or fantasy into which it plunges, spurred on by the love of gain, and the necessity of excitement, or the force of intimidation. Charles Mackay. 100 years ago, our society's consciousness was changed dramatically from the independent, resonating, close-knit communities to what we are today. With the creation of the Federal Reserve, the income tax, and the IRS, we are now the embodiment of the dreams of men like the Rothschilds, the Morgans, and the Rockefellers. Indoctrinated, narcissistic, debt-ridden consumers. They needed us to fit their greedy nature for more. They needed us to willingly empower their schemes. That is why so much of business, politics, and wars are not spent on products, policies, or bombs. It is on winning the hearts and minds of those that they seek to conquer. Why is it that they see the power that you have and you don't? You cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. You must see the world anew. Humanity always does the right thing after they have exhausted all the alternatives. I am hopeful that after this largest and most pervasive illusion of power is wiped clean, that individuals will see that waste and horror that it produces is a cause for a conscious evolution that would seek a balanced, resonating way of life, where people do what they promise, exchange value for value, and do no harm. It has been well said that men think in herds. It will also be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. Charles Mackay. After enough people get burned by the intangible debt-based money, they will find value in real wealth. After enough people get burned by the collective, they will find the value in real people who care about them and empower them. After enough people die for lies, they will wake up to the truth that has been whispering to them all along and realize that they only needed to be so brave enough to listen. All know the way, but few actually walk it. This is what's coming for humanity, and for some it can start today, and others it may take a few wasted generations. All it takes is the trivium to logically question your reality and your path in life. Once you have clarity, you only need to walk it. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost.
John D. Rockefeller ruthlessly consolidated the new oil industry. Rockefeller bought or drove out all competition at every level of his business. At one point, 1% of the entire U.S. economy flowed through his businesses. He grew so large that a famous antitrust case was brought about to break up Standard Oil into 7 companies. While it is commonly thought as a blow to John D. Rockefeller, it was in fact his greatest accomplishment. With one case, the little guy felt like they stuck it to the rich, but the breakup only served to make Rockefeller even wealthier, as the pieces were worth far more than the whole. While John D. Rockefeller saw the breakup of his oil monopoly in 1911, he soon set his eyes on the largest monopoly of all, central banking. The Rothschilds had already owned many of the central banks of Europe, with the Bank of England being their crown jewel. They famously were quoted as saying that they did not care who sat on the throne so long as they issued the money. In 1900, it was estimated that the Rothschilds owned half of the world's wealth. The House of Rothschild expanded their empire secretly through the use of their banks or their agents. Their central banks controlled the currencies throughout most of the Western world. They moved to control the railroads and heavy industry in Europe, controlled the diamond market through Cecil Rhodes, and made huge ventures in the Russian and Arab oil exploration. They even controlled the Vatican finances, believe it or not. They have had great success financing and controlling powerful men to advance their aims. They financed the Harrimans, Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Carnegies in the United States. Soon the American industrialists became so wealthy that they did not need debt.
And even in the US, most of the wealth was moving west, away from the Eastern establishment. So while these men were very rich, they were not in complete control. They needed the right crisis to bring about their predetermined plan for another privately owned central bank after Andrew Jackson had killed their last bank. Theodore Roosevelt went about fighting the many monopolies in public for the little guy. But the reality is, he did very little to take away their power. When he quote-unquote broke up Standard Oil, he succeeded in making the Rockefellers even more powerful and rich because the parts were worth more than the whole. After Roosevelt was re-elected, J.P. Morgan and his allies went about calling in loans from smaller banks. This led to a dramatic contraction in the money supply that resulted in people selling their stocks to raise cash. The Panic of 1907 had started. Bank runs began all across the country since most of the banks had very little actual cash reserves due to fractional reserve banking. When the time was right, J.P. Morgan entered the center of the stage and pledged to support the American economy with money created out of thin air. His plan, approved by the Congress, was to create $200 million out of nowhere to support his banks and the markets. Morgan bought up banks and real assets to further consolidate power. The boom-bust cycle was also used to pave the way for a quote-unquote more stable central bank system. By 1908, Morgan had saved the American economy and was declared a hero. This episode is widely seen as the genesis of the new privately owned central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve. J.P. Morgan caused and then acted as a savior for the rich man's panic of 1907 and acted as a one-man Federal Reserve back then. What was not known was that J.P. Morgan was just a Rothschild frontman and was only worth $80 million upon his death. Even John D. Rockefeller was quoted as saying, "And to think, he wasn't even a rich man." Those not favorable to the money trusts could be squeezed out of business, and the people frightened into demanding changes in the banking and currency laws which the money trust would frame. Congressman Charles Lindbergh. On June 16, 1909, President Taft, in an address to Congress, proposed a 2% federal income tax on corporations by way of an excise tax and a constitutional amendment to allow the previously enacted income tax. This was sold to the public as only a tax on the rich. As we now see, everyone is quote-unquote rich now. The income tax was necessary to fund the government's debt expansion. The interest on the debt had to be guaranteed by the taxes on the people. Twice, the income and corporate tax were found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The 16th Amendment took 4 years for all of the states to ratify. Senator Aldrich pushed the income tax through on February 3, 1913. President Theodore Roosevelt established a National Monetary Commission headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was intimately tied to both J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers through marriage. Senator Aldrich spent many months touring Europe's, or Rothschild's, central banks. When he came back, he met some of the most powerful men in America in Jekyll Island to plot the return of the privately held central bank in the United States. Paul Warburg was given $500,000 by Kuhn, Loeb and Company to lobby Congress for a privately owned central bank. His partner, Jacob Schiff, was very close to the Rothschild family and was financially backing the overthrow of the Tsar of Russia. The Schiffs, Warburgs, and Rothschilds were all intermarried and close business partners. The American power and European power conspired to share the new central bank. These elite families saw disturbing trends in securing their empires. Economic and political power was shifting from the East Coast to the West, away from their infrastructure. Competition from smaller local banks and corporations that were able to fund their enterprises from profits as opposed to their debt. They also saw the trend of saving against their industrial and banking interests. Soon, tycoon families would no longer need debt. They also saw that if they could create a private central bank, they could privatize the profits and socialize the losses. In short, these men wanted a monopoly and to crush all competition to their interests. These bankers plotted on Jekyll Island. The name of the bank was most important. It was to be given the illusion that it was a government agency and not a private cartel. They needed to create regional branches to give the appearance that it wouldn't be dominated by Wall Street. They would start slowly once established and move more radically to concentrate power. It was vital to push the idea that a central bank was needed to stabilize the currency and the economy. Finally, they needed to give the appearance that Wall Street did not want this bank. On that trip, the Federal Reserve Act was written by bankers for bankers. Despite the boom-bust cycle, the bankers saw their share of deposits shrink as the amount of banks doubled to over 20,000 banks. The other trend that worked against the big bankers was that businesses started to self-fund projects through profits. Through the Federal Reserve, they could dominate the reserves of the entire country. Special attention was paid to the name of the bank to give it the impression of a government bank and that it had the capacity to be a stabilizing force. They also gave the illusion of the president choosing the chairman and board of governors. The bankers just stacked the deck. This bill would give a monopoly on the creation of U.S. currency to the privately held banker hands. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Woodrow Wilson. When the bankers floated the Republican Aldrich Plan, it was immediately called out as a Wall Street plan by the opposition. They started to support Woodrow Wilson, the president of Princeton, to run for president of the U.S. But first they would have to indoctrinate him on their policies. The bankers financed Woodrow Wilson as a Democratic presidential candidate. This proved to be the trick they needed to get to their goal. During the election, Democrats condemned the Aldrich Plan and promised no central bank. 13 months later, now President Woodrow Wilson broke his promise and sold this country into slavery. By controlling both sides of the political debate, they ensured victory. The Republican Aldrich Bill became the Democratic Glass-Owen Bill. Brushing aside the external differences affecting the shells, we find the kernels of the two systems very closely resembling and related to one another. Paul Warburg. The bankers even went as far as to have two of the Jekyll Island participants, Aldrich and Vanderlip, come out and oppose the Glass-Owen Bill. Although the Aldrich Federal Reserve Plan was defeated, its essential points were all contained in the plan that was adopted. Frank Vanderlip. The bill was snuck through Congress 2 days before Christmas in 1913. We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board. This evil institution has impoverished and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it. Congressman Lewis McFadden. This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill. Charles Lindbergh. Banking was conceived in iniquity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create deposits, and with the flick of the pen they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take it away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, and they ought to disappear, for this would be a happier and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create deposits. Sir Josiah Stamp, the director of the Bank of England and the second richest man in England. The second part will show the horror of debt and death the madmen have spread throughout humanity. The foundation of the Federal Reserve was necessary for the Anglo-American power led by the Rothschilds and Rockefellers to not only consolidate power over the growing United States, but also for the eventual domination of the world. Without the power of this privately owned central bank that was slipped through Congress just before Christmas in 1913, so much of the evils we see in the world today simply would not exist. Now we will see the summer of the bankster as they manipulate humanity into global war and slavery. The British Empire had been under the financial control of the Rothschild family. This family gloated that since they controlled the money supply of the empire that the sun never set upon, they did not care who sat upon the throne. Their power and influence enabled the British war machine to engage in psychopathic wars with just about every nation on earth. The British Empire, under the money power of the Rothschilds, invaded 9 out of 10 countries on earth, leaving only 22 nations on earth that never felt the debt and death of the British Empire. The Rothschilds profited tremendously off the defeat of Napoleon and financially backed the British Empire's opium wars against China, the conquering of India, the Crimea War, and many more wars in Africa. And with the establishment of the Federal Reserve Central Bank in the United States at the end of 1913, It only extended their power further around the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, Britain had three pillars to their domination. Number one, they had the most formidable navy. This led to the natural domination of trade because the British Navy protected British trade, and non-British ships had to take out insurance through the biggest insurance companies, which were, of course, British. Number two, they had unquestioned domination of international banking. Since most of the world's trade was through London, this brought tremendous wealth. With coordinated efforts, they could manipulate markets to favor British trade. Number three, they had domination of the Earth's major raw materials: cotton, metals, coffee, diamonds, coal, and petroleum. All of this was, of course, under the control of the Rothschilds. The British saw a threat on the horizon with an economic and military rival in Germany. Germany had an impressive industrial development along with a modern navy and merchant fleet. Germany had a national system of technical schools that produced highly skilled workers. Germany's coal and steel production soon became world-class. Their financial markets were locked together, and that did not allow for speculation or much foreign investment. By 1906, Germany produced the most powerful battleship on the planet. And then 3 years later, in 1909, Germany outdid herself with the Nassau class. This buildup of navy could be for no other reason than to challenge the British. A more alarming development was a Berlin to Baghdad rail line that would give access over land to the huge petroleum resources in the Middle East, circumventing the powerful British Navy. Both Britain and Germany needed oil to run their fleets. Britain was unable to win a land war in Europe, so it needed to get the isolationist American people into World War I. As we showed in part 1 of the Rise and the Fall of the Bankster series, Woodrow Wilson was a puppet of the banksters and had already went back on his campaign promise to not allow the Federal Reserve. A world war would just need a little more work. With the creation of the Federal Reserve, the banksters now had unlimited funds built off of the back of the industrious American population. All they needed was the right crisis to push America into world war and save the bankrupt British Empire. Secret negotiations took place between President Woodrow Wilson and the British, as well as the French, to enrage the American people against Germany. Germany's submarine fleet was cutting off England from the rest of the world, and very early on, the British Empire was broke. Germany warned that the military supplies coming from the United States to England would be destroyed, and that supplying arms to Britain would be considered an act of war. By the time of World War I in 1914, the British Treasury was officially bankrupt. Upon the declaration of war, Britain suspended gold and silver payments and placed all the bullion on deposit with the Rothschild-owned Bank of England. They promptly paid out legal tender and recruited J.P. Morgan in America for more financing. Later, Winston Churchill was named the First Lord of the Admiralty. In October of 1914, he changed the policy that allowed unarmed cruisers the option of letting enemy submarines search the ship and be allowed the opportunity to get to the lifeboats before the ship was torpedoed. Now they were forced to engage with submarines, and this cold-blooded strategy was justified by Churchill. Quote, "The first British countermove, made on my responsibility, was to deter the Germans from surface attack. The submerged U-boat had to rely increasingly on underwater attack, and thus ran the greater risk of mistaking neutral for British ships and the drowning of neutral crews, and thus embroiling Germany with other great powers." Unquote. Problem, reaction, solution. The Lusitania was a military vessel in every way except for that it was converted for civilian use. She had 1,195 people on board along with war material, 6 million rounds of ammunition, and over 1,200 cases of shrapnel shells. This was a direct violation of international neutrality treaties. Germany protested to the Wilson administration with no results. Finally, Germany took out 50 ads in American newspapers 1 week before the Lusitania was to set sail. The Lusitania set sail on May 1st, 1915 from New York City. She was to rendezvous with the Juno destroyer off the coast of Ireland for protection. They never met, as the Juno was called off duty and ordered to report to Queenstown at the last minute. Along with the fact that the Lusitania was ordered to slow down to preserve the use of coal, they quickly became sitting ducks. The Germans blew a hole in the side of the Lusitania and exploded the munitions that they were transporting. One of the largest ships ever built sank in 8 minutes. The head of the official investigation into the Lusitania quit his job, citing that, quote, "the Lusitania case was damn dirty business," unquote. Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan sent a note to the German government asking to, quote, come to a clear and full understanding as to the grave situation which has resulted, unquote, from the sinking of the Lusitania. When the German government responded by justifying their Navy's action on the basis that the Lusitania was carrying munitions and that they were warned, Woodrow Wilson himself penned a strongly worded note insisting that the sinking had been an illegal action and demanding that Germany cease unrestricted submarine warfare against unarmed merchantmen. On May 9, 1915, Secretary of State Bryan sent a note to President Wilson. It said, quote, Germany has the right to prevent contraband going to the Allies, and a ship carrying contraband should not rely upon passengers to protect her from attack. It would be like putting women and children in front of an army, unquote. When Wilson wrote a stronger statement to Germany, Bryan tendered his resignation on June 9, 1915, as he became disillusioned with the war drums being beaten by the administration. He was asked to reconsider his resignation and promised to think about it overnight. His wife described that night as a restless night for the Secretary of State. He finally did some reading until he became drowsy. He read a book called A Wreath of Appreciation of Andrew Jackson. In it, the secretary saw the connection of the bankers and the pending World War. He resigned the next day, hoping that so close to the election, his stand might prevent the government from moving towards war. Modern war is enabled by modern banking. Nothing creates debts better than war. War is necessary to the debt necessary to pay back the principal and interest of prior debts. Also, it is important to destroy capital. World War I created the most debt ever. The Rothschilds in Frankfurt lent money to Germany. The Rothschilds in London lent money to England. The Rothschilds in Vienna lent money to Austria. The Rothschilds in Paris lent money to France. All at a time when J.P. Morgan was the largest consumer on earth, spending $10 million a day. While France and Germany were locked in a bloody stalemate, Britain mobilized nearly 1 million men in the Persian Gulf against the Ottoman Empire. After the war, the Allies carved up the Ottoman Empire, with the British getting the crown jewel of what is today known as Iraq. They practically gave away Saudi Arabia, which of course was a huge blunder, but they got what they wanted. Germany and her access to the largest oil reserves in the world were now in shambles. So what would have happened if we had stayed out of World War I? The United States would have watched two old world powers end up bloody and bankrupt. There would have been no communist coup in the Soviet Union, and that would have prevented Stalin's genocide and gulags. There would have been no rise of Hitler or the Nazis. There would have been no World War II and war crime firebombing of Dresden, Germany, or the nuclear hellfire of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. No Cold War, no CIA, coups or assassinations, no Vietnam, no Cuban Missile Crisis, no Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, no CIA funding of Al-Qaeda, no radicalization of Islam, no American and British coup in Iran, no Iran-Iraq war, no 9/11, no Gulf War I, II, or now III, no police state, and ultimately no collapse of the dollar. Our ignorance of history and our conscious or unconscious support of the debt and death paradigm gives rise to the worst in humanity that would spread debt and death globally and generationally. How many people sell their souls every day to do their part to fund this travesty? How long can we turn a blind eye to the violent psychopaths that we empower? How many children will we kill or enslave with debt? Nature has a way to sort these things out, and a day is coming for judgment. We will reap what we have sowed. Don't think because you did nothing that you will not be affected. Everyone, guilty or innocent, will feel the flame that will burn everything down to the ground.
The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion, by the central banks of the world, acting in concert, by secret agreements, arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. The growth of financial capitalism made possible a centralization of world economic control, and use of this power for the direct benefit of financiers and the indirect injury of all other economic groups. Professor Carol Quigley of Georgetown University. The first half of the Rise and the Fall of the Bankster series has chronicled the consolidation of the banking industry by banking dynasties like the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgan, Warburg, Schiff, Aldrich, and more. These cunning men now own and control the world's privately held central banks that dominate governments, industries, and humanity as a whole.
Now, since the Federal Reserve has come into being in 1913, illegally, without a constitutional amendment, by bribing a few senators during Christmas vacation, they turned over the most important power that the American government has, the creation and issuance of money, to a private bank. Through that private bank issuing money, they have destroyed this country. They have destroyed the purchasing power of the money in this country. They've created social programs that are destroying this country.
With the establishment of the privately owned Federal Reserve in 1913, these power-hungry men then set about to spread debt and death throughout the rest of the world through the industrialization and financialization of war. They spread death to all those that opposed them and debt to all of those that fell under their spell. For over 100 years, this consolidation of power has brought humanity closer to their ultimate goal of a new world order or a one-world government where the Anglo-American criminal elite rule.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
There's a need for a new world order.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions.
Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
He kept talking about a new world order.
We need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government.
For decades you told us the way it is. But tonight we honor you for fighting for the way it could be.
Create a new world order.
Has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order.
It is a new world order.
And the hope that each of us has to build a new world order.
To use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
Let us reorder this world around us.
Into the creation of a new world order, financial world order.
In this new century, Americans and Europeans alike will be required to do more, not less. Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice.
Today, Europe can propose the principles and rules that will shape a new global order.
Good evening, everybody. President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
Look, there is the possibility in the next few months of a global new deal that will involve all the countries of the world in sorting out and cleaning up the banking system.
What it really is putting the American economy under international regulation. Yeah. And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
Conspiracy theories.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry.
These arrogant psychopaths sought to dominate nature and ultimately their fellow man. While these men are very powerful, we will see that they are not all powerful. Now we will start to show the cracks in their plans with too big to fail. Like a cancer that metastasizes in a healthy host, the productive organs will start to shut down. Soon the cancer will spread and eventually kill the host. There is no cure to the bankster cancer other than a total collapse of their system. They have not only infected our financial system, but our politics, relationships, values, and even our consciousness. Only a complete systemic collapse will end this scourge upon humanity.
We are an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you'll study that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how these things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be just left to study what we do. Karl Rove.
Throughout the 20th century, the Anglo-American criminal elite sought to destroy their rivals and spread debt to everyone else. With the power of secrecy, These scheming men would use the age-old formula of creating problems, waiting for the inevitable public reaction, and then pushing forward their predetermined solution. Once the Federal Reserve was established, these cunning men set about to foment war with a growing economic and military rival in Germany, with a race towards oil in the Middle East. The, quote, war to end all wars, unquote, claimed 16 million lives and 20 million wounded. This was just a warm-up for what the bankers wanted next. The first truly international central bank ever created was called the Bank of International Settlements. It was originally created to facilitate reparations imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. This was just a perfect excuse to start an international banking system that was above the law of any one nation. With the expanded power of the international banking system in place, the Anglo-American banksters then sought to create chaos out of order.
You see, the real value of a conflict, the true value, is in the debt that it creates. You control the debt, you control everything.
Literally every single major revolution, war, and economic crash has the fingerprints of these men as they sought to spread debt and death throughout the world. In the epic Sons of Liberty Academy, we document how they were behind the communist revolution in Russia, the rise of Hitler, stole America's gold, caused the Great Depression, brought fascism to Italy, created the military-industrial complex, funded both sides of the Cold War, led America and Vietnam, funded socialism and the breakup of the family in America with the Great Society, caused the oil shocks in the 1970s, funded the international drug trade, all of that on top of the countless false flags, coups, and assassinations. From the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913, global debt was only a few $billion. Now, we are measuring it in hundreds of trillions to quadrillions. All the while, the cunning men are taking their cut and laughing all the way to the bank. And this does not factor in the hundreds of millions of lives that were unnecessarily lost due to war, disease, or depression that these cunning men have wrought on humanity. While the progress of the international criminal bankers looks like an invincible juggernaut, this trail of debt and death is more out of desperation than divine strength. When you have to force something on the world with the threat of death, it is unnatural and therefore not real. And they fear this. Beyond all of the fortunes, conspiracies, and genocides, the criminal elite are trying to hide their fatal flaw of their scheme, debt-based money. Their entire scheme of governments, media, militaries, corporations, think tanks, oil wars, drug running, and just about every other evil scheme in the world is utterly reliant upon the original sin of fractional reserve banking. Throughout most of humanity, men have used gold and silver as money. They were durable, divisible, portable, and intrinsic value served humanity well and limited these scheming psychopathic men from engaging in unprofitable efforts of collectivism like war and welfare. With the establishment of a fractional reserve banking system at the Federal Reserve, the very nature of money was transformed from intrinsic value to debt. Power was shifted from those that provided value to humanity to those that enslaved humanity with debt and death. No longer did harvesting the world's resources or adding value to them create wealth. Now, those that created the most debt created the most wealth. And these men knew that nothing creates more debt than war. Under this fractional reserve system, when debt is created, money is created. When debt is paid off, money is destroyed. When you truly grasp the enormity of that little idea, your world will never be the same again. When you take on any debt, you are literally creating money out of thin air and you are the collateral. They use your debt obligation to back the money they create. This is why the debt will never be paid off. For if it did, there would literally be no money left in the world. If you really think about this, it is even worse than that. If your debts create all of the money in the world, where then does the money come from to pay the debt back with interest? Your debt only creates the principal amount that then enters the economy, not the interest. The only way for the interest on the loan to be paid is that every year more debt has to be created in the excess of debt and interest accrued the year before. This is why the global debt creation is growing exponentially. It has to, or we would see a massive collapse. For if all the debt was paid off, there would not only be no money in existence, but the bankers would still say we owe the interest on all of the money, even though there's no money left.
The whole government is a Ponzi scheme.
It is insane that we have based all of human life off this sick system. What's even worse is the way that humanity is so completely ignorant of the way the world has gone so horribly wrong. This simple little fact of economics explains why we have a constant state of war, huge and growing wealth disparity, destruction of local communities, millions on antidepressants, systemic unemployment, the breakup of the family, riots, and even suicides like Robin Williams. Debt money is the rot behind all of it. Most men live lives of quiet desperation and go to their grave with their song still in them. Henry David Thoreau. Humanity is suffering under a monetary system that is rigged to keep us in a constant, unnatural, quiet panic. This is done to keep us so worried about the day-to-day struggle of our lives so that we never have the time to contemplate, much less change our way of life. The wealthy know this very well, and even recently, a billionaire hedge fund manager, Tom Steyer, was quoted as saying that Americans were not as sophisticated as the ultra-wealthy because, quote, everybody else, which is the 99.5% of the people whose lives are very busy and complicated and pressing, and they don't have a lot of time to think about the things that don't immediately impact themselves and their family, unquote. Well, Tom, if we did not have a rigged game that you and your crony capitalist buddies were not constantly stealing from us with bailouts, wars, and insider trading, humanity would blossom. But we do have these cancerous parasites that produce nothing of any tangible value, and then have the nerve to talk down to the good people who are doing the best with what they have. If Tom Steyer was half the man he claims he is, he would tell the truth about the system that made him so wealthy and promote individual solutions to shield those individuals from the banking system's inevitable collapse. Most people that suffer under this system are in denial and think that this is just the way it is. Many in the anger phase protest against the cops or puppet bankers and politicians. Or worse, in the bargaining phase, they support collectivist messiahs that vow to fix the collectivist problems. Hope and fear of this system are a purposeful waste of time, which then leads people to the depression phase of the awakening.
God almighty.
The final phase of acceptance realizes that while the world is messed up, the solution is only in our hands and nowhere else. Without control of the money supply, every other sinister scheme simply would not exist. Their ability to create debt and therefore money out of thin air has empowered the worst in humanity. The solution is for individuals to stack real tangible wealth outside of this rigged casino. The fatal flaw of the need to constantly expand debt was the driving force of the American empire as it dominated the world after the end of the Cold War. This went unchallenged as America's largest generation, the baby boomers, entered into their peak earning years, and they were the first generation to embrace debt. They rocked through the rest of the 90s consuming, going into debt, and throwing money at Wall Street. Then, the party crashed with the collapse of the tech bubble in the year 2000 and the Enron scandal. Suddenly, there was a leak in the American empire's dam and something had to be done.
Somebody help me.
In the Sons of Liberty Academy, we covered the neocon project for a new American century, the Taliban ending the Anglo-American opium trade, Saddam selling oil for euros, the plan to dominate the grand chessboard of the world's energy resources, the building of the Homeland Police State, the $2.4 trillion missing from the Pentagon, and the false flag known as 9/11. There you will see that nothing that happens in this world happens accidentally.
I got a call one day from an attorney woman I knew, and she said, would you like to meet one of the Rockefellers? I said, sure, I'd love to. And we became friends, and he began to divulge a lot of things to me. So he said to me one night, he said that there's going to be an event there. And out of that event, you're going to see, we're going to go into Afghanistan, so we can run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We're going to go into Iraq to take the oil and establish a base in the Middle East. And we're going to go into Venezuela and try and get rid of Chavez. And the first two they've accomplished. Chavez they didn't accomplish. And he said you're going to see guys going into caves looking for looking for people that they're never going to find. You know, he was laughing about the fact that you have this war on terror. There's no real enemy. He's talking about how by having this war on terror, you can never win it because it's an eternal war. And so you can always keep taking people's liberties away.
The American empire rolled over the rest of the world with lies about weapons of mass destruction and boogeymen in caves. The very profitable war machine was spun up, and once again the worst in humanity partied on. Behind the scenes, the bankers knew that if the debt did not grow fast enough, they needed to drive down rates to prevent the system from becoming insolvent. This market manipulation took money created out of nowhere to buy bonds to drive down rates. We were now a market totally devoid of reality, just a market of constant intervention and rigging. This fueled a housing boom and a massive misallocation in capital to rampant consumerism. We did not build anything of value to improve the lives of humanity. No productive factories to provide jobs, no new technologies that saved resources and capital. No, we blew it on McMansions, Hummers, and iPhones. No other generation in the history of the world was able to consume so much and provide so little in return. All of this was once again fueled by the minions on Wall Street that not only drove down rates but made sure that anyone that was breathing could take on more debt and buy a house and all of the things to fill the American dream. We personally saw people who could not qualify for a used car a few years prior, now all of a sudden buying $500,000 houses and Mercedes. This could not happen if not for the minions on Wall Street selling all of this garbage debt all over the world. They would package up these garbage loans and create tranches that would polish the poo into securitized gold. Just like the world just laid down for the fake war on terror, they once again trusted America. Countries, institutions, and investors all over the world ended up as unwitting owners of this garbage debt of unemployed McMansion consumers. In the financial collapse of 2008, the world woke up. They woke up to see that they were married to a cancerous psychopath and needed a plan to get divorced. They connected the dots between America's dollar dominance and the global wars that they used to secure the world's resources and trading lanes. While Goldman Sachs targeted the rising economies of Brazil, Russia, India, and China as the next targets of Wall Street dominance, we were the first to recognize these nations as the anti-hegemon. We clearly saw that these nations had all suffered under the Anglo-American Empire, and despite having no cultural or ideological unity, they did stand in opposition to the Anglo-American Empire. 5 years later, it is now very clear that the anti-hegemon will stand in political, financial, and military opposition to the Anglo-American Empire and the lies, debts, and death they have spread over the last century. Americans too woke up and saw that when times were good, Wall Street rolled in the profits, and when times were bad, they threatened to take down everyone.
And a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no.
In the wake of the 2008 financial crisis for the average American, the world became very real. Nearly 3 decades of the American consumer dream suddenly changed. People lost money, foreclosed homes, lost their jobs, and became worse, disillusioned. As bad as the 2008 collapse was, the full-on terrible reality did not hit just then. People still had jobs, houses, and savings to lose. People had faith in the hope and the change of politicians and the omnipotence of the central bankers. As we will see in the final part of the Rise and the Fall of the Bankster series, the terminal phase is going to be brutal for everyone. There is no safety net, there is no more faith in the system, and the world will not be so gullible as it was in 2008.
Thank you again.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was the last question. Thank you very much for coming.
We believe that physical silver outside of this inevitable systemic collapse will save the individual from the collective hell that is coming. The Silvershield series seeks to create historically significant designs that will create generational wealth to help establish abundant solutions in the next monetary paradigm.
On Thursday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown of money market accounts in the United States to the tune of $550 billion was being drawn out in a matter of an hour or two. The Treasury opened up its window to help. They pumped $105 billion in the system and quickly realized that they could not stem the tide. We were having an electronic run on the banks. They decided to close the operation, close down the money accounts, and announce a guarantee of $250,000 per account so there wouldn't be further panic out there. And that's what actually happened. If they had not done that, their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours, the world economy would have collapsed. Now, we talked at that time about what would happen if that happened. It would have been the end of our economic system and our political system as we know it.
Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no.
When it failed, Lehman had $639 billion in assets. Today, J.P. Morgan has nearly $2.5 trillion in assets. That's 4 times as big as Lehman was when it failed. And I guess the question I'm asking is, have they ever gotten to a plan that you can say with a straight face is credible?
Well, I've understood this to be a process. These are extremely complex documents for these firms to produce. Our second round of submissions, we're looking at plans that run into tens of thousands of pages. And I think what was intended is that this determination you're talking about whether or not they're credible, question is, do they facilitate an orderly resolution? And I think we need to give these firms feedback.
So I'll stop there because we're running out of time, but you said that these plans run to the tens of thousands of pages. All I can say is that what's been released to the public is 35 pages long.
On a long enough timeline, the survival rate drops to 0. This is true for individuals, corporations, governments, empires, and even the almighty dollar. Nothing man-made is all-powerful, and up until its collapse, any Goliath looks unstoppable. When the end does come, they will say, "No one saw this coming." Consider yourself warned. The end of the line is coming. The dollar is the world's reserve currency that funds the military-industrial complex, that secures the world's natural resources and trading lanes, that our corporations harvest into tremendous profits, that flow through the banking centers in London and New York, that control our politics, police, and media, that then controls you. As much as you might even want to hold on to this American dream, you will wake to a very harsh post-dollar reality soon enough. There are simply too many systemic factors that will lead to the end of the dollar. Aging demographics of the baby boomers, exponentially rising debts, especially among our young, offshoring of manufacturing, misallocation of capital into consumerism, massive wealth inequality, illegal immigrants feeding off the Ponzi scheme, resource degradation like the drought in California and peak oil, blowback from decades of assassinations, coups, and wars, and the fact that 2/3 of the world today does not benefit from the current economic order and are actively working to rid themselves of the dollar heroin. All of these and much, much more assure us that the end of the line is coming soon for the dollar. Things that cannot go on forever simply won't. Do not expect the dollar to die quietly. Far too many would rather slaughter faceless people than give up their benefits, iPhones, and Whoppers. Far too much power and wealth are at stake for it to simply wither away and die.
The United States is in a perpetual state of war because the bankers control the politicians and they read the script as given to them by the banksters and they make huge amounts of money off of this.
War is coming, and as we have seen in the first 3 parts of the rise and the fall of the bankster, nothing that happens in this world happens accidentally. We fully expect the debt and death-mongering Anglo-American Empire to conduct false flag operations to bring about the right crisis.
Never waste a good crisis.
Their effort to create chaos out of order is to once again cover up the fact that we are bankrupt and run by a bunch of psychopaths.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
After successfully pulling off the false flag known as 9/11, it was widely known in the intelligence community that they were soon going to roll over all of the Middle East.
And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Vice President Dick Cheney even plotted to have a false flag against Iran just before they left office in 2008. In the same style of the flags of the USS Maine, USS Liberty, and the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Cheney plotted to have U.S. servicemen killed and blame it on some enemy, namely Iran.
One of the items was, why not, there was a dozen ideas proffered, how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard build 4 or 5 Iranian boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up. Might cost some lives. And it was rejected because you can't have Americans killing Americans. But that's the level of stuff we were talking about, provocation.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing, which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why?
Israel and the United States failed to provoke Iran, so they moved on to Libya to loot their gold and oil.
We came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? Oh, I'm sure it did.
If they could not get Iran, the Anglo-American Empire would incite the moderate leader of Syria, the former ophthalmologist Bashar Assad, hoping to drag in Iran. It is widely accepted that the Anglo-American Empire was behind the rebels in Syria that have caused close to 250,000 Syrian deaths.
We have been arming people directly who are Al-Qaeda. Al-Nusra Front is Al-Qaeda. These people are psychopaths to the worst order. They are conducting suicide attacks. They are gassing people. We know Carla Del Ponte said in May that it was the so-called rebels in Syria that were using sarin gas, not the Bashar al-Assad regime. No, it was not.
They even blamed a chemical weapon attack that killed 1,000 Syrians on the Assad government, despite the UN evidence that it was the United States-backed rebels that were most likely the villains.
What appeared on, to our investigation that that was used by the opponents, by the rebels. And we have no indication at all that the government, Syria, the authority of the Syrian government have used chemical weapons.
After Putin successfully ended the Syrian crisis last year, the Anglo-American Empire sought to create crisis in Russia's backyard, the Ukraine. The Ukraine was the backyard of Russia, considered vital to Russia's interests and her security. She was a nation not to be touched by NATO. The United States fomented a fake revolution and put in their puppet Yatsenuk, as evidenced by the State Department's own Victoria Nuland being caught 3 weeks before the Ukrainian Revolution, plotting to
fuck the EU.
Once again, the world said no to the Anglo-American Empire as the Crimea successfully pulled away from the U.S. puppets. Even the so-called evidence that the U.S. drummed up to condemn Russia with in the airplane crash of MH17 was weaker than the quote-unquote evidence they had in the Syrian chemical false flag. But it did distract from Israel slaughtering thousands of Palestinians.
Think about when you put your children to bed at night. This is something I think about on a daily basis. You put your children to bed at night and you expect to see them in the morning. That's a luxury that people in Gaza just do not have. So what would it be like for you living under those circumstances?
Then the United States even said that Russia had invaded the Ukraine, which also was proven false. The United States is desperately using false flag tactics in an age of internet, whistleblowers, and an increasingly aware humanity.
The historically unprecedented challenge, which is being posed in our time by a massive global political awakening, and thus is obstructing our ability to deal effectively with the global political turmoil that this awakening is generating.
Remember those Syrian freedom fighters that were fighting the Syrian government? Well, guess what? They are now ISIS, the incredible, new and improved Al-Qaeda. They have new cars. They speak perfect English.
An American citizen of your country.
They behead journalists. They have their own air force and weapons of mass destruction. The perfect fake enemy for the largest fake empire to fight. There is no doubt in our minds that the CIA is behind this, just like the Afghan freedom fighter Zbigniew Brzezinski radicalized against the Russians and then used to blame for the fake war on terror.
And what we've suspected long time, that these ISIS beheadings were fake. I mean, there's so many examples of just discrepancies of like green screen acting and stuff like that. And it turns out this is apparently Cyber Berkut, which is kind of like a Russian anonymous hacker group. Supposedly got this from one of John McCain's staffers.
ISIS, which is a government funded terrorist group, John McCain's buddies, ISIS, over there.
And on top of that, I am concerned about this report about Syrian rebels and the ceasefire with ISIS. Senator
But
Paul,
that's not true.
Well,
it's not true. It's
you want
not
me to read
true.
from the,
Whether I don't care about the report. I know these people intimately. We talk to them all the time.
Cyber Berkut released the video, and it's just exactly what we thought: a cheap production of bad actors, poor quality of everything. And it's just them goofing around, and it's in front of a green screen. It's it looks like Jihadi John, and it shows how these guys, they weren't sweating, crying in the desert. When they go to cut their head, you don't see blood squirming all over the place. You don't even see the guy resisting. I mean, just even a basic human reaction to a knife being held to your throat, these guys would have done more than that. So. Watch the video. I don't know the truth of it at all. I mean, it could be a Russian counter co-op or whatever. But the point is, once you see the magician's tricks, you're no longer fooled again.
Some people call me a terrorist. I consider myself a teacher. American. Ready for another lesson.
Customer territory. Yes. Yes. It's think tank picked it up. The pathology of a serial killer. The manipulation of Western iconography. Ready for another lesson. Blah, blah, blah. Cultural mind performance. Building into life. Good performance. Are people die? Costumes. Green screen.
This behind-the-scenes video that Cyber Berkut put out looks like it's the James Foley beheading, which I think was the first ISIS beheading that they did, and ties in with another crisis actor, Katie Foley.
All of us, Katie and Michael, to imagine the pain you've been going through. So how has your family been coping with this?
Who apparently was also Alex Israel, Adam Lanza, the supposed shooter of Sandy Hook that they used for to get everybody all hyped up on gun control. So this is another exposed confirmed illusion to get people to emotionally react, give up their rights for protection to sick psychopaths that are manipulating people, to get us to willingly give our power back to the top, to fight these illusionary wars, to support this illusionary banking system. It's all built off of lies, people. People, please pay attention and get off this stuff. Work only on the things that you can control and forget about all these fake emotionalistic stories.
A Skype alert, and so I opened my computer and it was Jim.
I mean, I was never in any of his.
He was just talking to me, and I told him Happy Thanksgiving.
I mean, I was never in any of his classes or anything like that, but
so
the historically unprecedented challenge, which is being posed in our time by a massive global political awakening, and thus is obstructing our ability to deal effectively with the global political turmoil that this awakening is generating.
I mean, they're all connected, and it all serves the purpose of creating fear and and legitimizing more debt and death, and that's what this whole paradigm is built off of. So, do I believe that the social media director of ISIS is some kid from Afghanistan? No, it's probably some guy in Washington or somewhere around there, and that they're doing this to create more fear and to fund more war and get people prepared for war. That's ultimately what this comes down to. The ISIS, it's maybe 5,000 men. You can't tell me that they caused this much trouble, but this is just a fake wag the dog war.
We, the West, the United States in particular, Israel and Britain, are the biggest terrorists on the planet. So our little junior partners in Al-Qaeda, which is nothing more than a CIA database, thus the name Al-Qaeda, this is nothing more than a group of terrorists working together, each playing one different role, but all of them working together for the same goal, which is to maintain this hideous and sick and twisted, unjust world that we have, which is a perpetual state of war. Always one illusion, one boogeyman after another.
These English-speaking, U.S.-trained boogeymen are using green screen theatrics with crisis actors trying to goad more highly profitable war. As you can clearly see, these psychopathic criminal elite are trying everything to start more war. They are desperate because they know that their dollar empire is crumbling, and that unless more debts are created or more resources stolen, the party stops and they will have to face their fate. 6 years after the too big to fails failed, these Anglo-American psychopaths must have a war to cover up the inevitable collapse of this cancerous economy. They must blame some external enemy for the internal rot they have caused. They must keep their system in place and you in fear. They must spread more debt and death. Reporters beheaded. 11 airliners have gone missing in Libya. Russians hijack JP Morgan. Whatever shock comes, believe nothing they throw in your face. It is all psychological operations to get you to willingly sacrifice your blood and your money for their power and profit. Never forget that. So what now? Expect more terror. Expect more shocks to the system and more innocent people to be blamed. Expect more rush to judgment parroted by the corporate media. Expect America to fall for the flimsiest of evidence. Expect to be called a coward for not wanting more war. Expect the world to say no more war. Expect the end of the dollar. Expect bank failures. Expect stock market crashes. Expect massive unemployment. Expect suicides, murders, and riots. Expect a very harsh reality. Expect the end of the line. The end of the line for the dollar is coming. This will be the single largest event in human history, for no other currency has been so pervasive in the lives of so many. The ramifications of this collapse will be so large and terrible because of how dependent and warped the societies that were built upon it have become. Every human interaction across the globe will be affected. There will be wars to fill the void of the United States military retreating all over the globe. There will be devastation in the stock and bond markets as the extraordinary privilege of the world's reserve currency ends. There will be panic as the just-in-time supply of 3 days' worth of fuel and 7 days' worth of food disappears. There will be psychological breaks from reality as the 28-day supply of antidepressants dry up for the 1 in 10 Americans currently on them. There will be anger as the world wakes up to their life savings being stolen. and no longer having a job. There will be fear as people realize that they don't have any real skills, real friends, or real assets. When the Great Depression happened in the 1930s, out-of-work husbands drank themselves into a stupor or simply left their families. Mothers were left to fend for their kids. There were no jobs, so many people resorted to the agrarian culture and planted food and canned. Do you really think that 80 years later that's even possible? Quite frankly, the Great Depression will be the best case scenario for when the dollar collapses. While the Anglo-American criminal elite will do everything in their power to create chaos to distract from the damage that they have created, they will not get away with it this time. Since the age of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, the psychopathic element is hidden behind power to spread debt and death for more power and profit. For centuries, they have lurked in the shadows, pillaging and causing genocide. Even as recently as 9/11, they have been able to laugh at the ignorant masses that they have herded into debt and death. Well, this is the end of the line for this psychopathic element. The collapse of the dollar and their desperation to hold empire together will show to the world their evil plots. This will be the first crisis and the largest one that will be laid bare for the entire world to see. Russia, China, Iran, and many other nations are well aware of how this debt and death paradigm works and are actively working to build a world without the dollar. Putin successfully outplayed Obama in Syria and took the Crimea without firing a single shot. China will soon have the world's largest economy and holds trillions of US dollars, but their massive accumulation of gold and their shot at the next world reserve currency will be formidable. Iran has suffered for over 50 years under the US aggression since the coup of Mohammad Mossadegh, including the US backing Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war that cost Iran over 1 million young men. Germany has fallen for 2 world wars started by the Anglo-Americans and has recently been denied their sovereign gold from the Federal Reserve. Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, forced Deutsche Bank out of the 117-year-old silver fix, stating that, quote, the precious metals manipulation is worse than the LIBOR rigging scandal, unquote, which is estimated at $800 trillion. While no nation will come out of this unscathed, these nations that have walked away from the dollar will be the first to come back and come out of this crisis much stronger than their current relative position today. So too will those individuals who also walk away first. They will not be immune to the collapse, but will recover the quickest and end up with generational wealth. While we do not expect a mass awakening in the United States, we do believe that the anger phase will lay waste to the current social and political order. American consumerism will be dead forever as this new consciousness realizes the consequences of waste. The puppet politicians and CEOs will be sacrificed to the angry hordes of disillusioned Americans. The real power will slink into the shadows with their gold bars and wait to put forward a new group of collectivist messiahs. Though many will have a plausible deniability of their crimes against humanity, the days of divine retribution are coming. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. The schemes and plots that have been hidden from humanity will be revealed for all to see. The apocalypse literally means an uncovering, a disclosure of knowledge, of something that has been kept secret from humanity. We can think of nothing more important that has been hidden than the psychopathic element that has convulsed humanity into debt and death. The anger phase will bring about this great purge, and there will be no place to hide once it starts. All sins will be revealed, and Judgment Day is coming. We believe that the end of the line will be tough, and also that it is vitally necessary if humanity is going to sober up from this sickness, just like a drunk that must hit rock bottom in order to face reality and then take personal responsibility. So too must our society. For far too long, our society has enabled the worst in humanity and have been living in a something-for-nothing dream. With the collapse, there will be no other choice but to get back to what is natural, real, and what works. After the fires have burned out, a new consciousness will grow out of the ashes of the old. Everything that is popular in this paradigm will be dropped like a bad habit in the next. Generations to come will look at the insanity of this paradigm with curiosity, and those that were prophetic enough to walk away from that insanity will be rewarded. A new consciousness will break away from the collective psychopathy of the old paradigm and form a new, abundant individualism consciousness. We will protect all individuals from collective tyrannies. We will cherish the gifts and talents of the young and not saddle them with debt. We will appeal to the highest and best self in humanity. We will love out differences and share in our commonalities. We will seek abundant, resonating people. We will seek to create sustainable solutions. The end of the line is coming. Are you ready?
There is a story of a New England farmer with a small pond in his pasture. Each summer, a group of wild ducks would frequent that pond. Try as he would, the farmer could never catch one. No matter how early in the morning he approached, no matter how carefully he constructed a blind, or what kind of duck call he tried. Somehow those crafty birds sensed the danger and managed to be out of range. Of course, when fall arrived, the ducks headed south, and the farmer's craving for a duck dinner only intensified. Then he got an idea. In the spring, he started scattering corn along the edge of the pond. The ducks liked corn, and since it was always there, they soon gave up on dipping and foraging for food on their own. After a while, they became used to the farmer and began to trust him. They can see he was their benefactor, and now they walk close enough to him with no sense of fear. Life was so easy they forgot how to fly. But soon it was unimportant, because now they were so fat they couldn't have gotten off the water even if they tried. Fall came and the ducks stayed. Winter came and the pond froze. The farmer built a shelter to keep them warm. The ducks were happy because they didn't have to fly. The farmer was especially happy because each week, all winter long, he had a delicious duck dinner. That is the story of America's Great Depression and our future. Wild horses used to roam the countryside free and independent. The same process man used to domesticate the horse is the same process the elite have done to enslave humanity.
When you go over there to the Arab countries, they are cutting off the heads of the soldiers of our Americans.
Please remain standing for our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see? And the rockets, red flag. Uh-oh. I'll make up for it now. Can you see by the dawn's early light, what's the twilight? Oh, sorry. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Whatsoever we strain, and the dawn lights still be.
Whose bright stars and bright stars
Through the perilous fight,
and the heavenly light.
Or the rapid rewards.
We're so gallantly fleeing.
And the rockets red glare.
and the rockets regular.
Bombs bursting in air.
Dead through the night, that our flag was still there.
America!
What other country could have invaded Iraq, hardly knowing the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite, and still managed to successfully set off a brutal sectarian civil war and ethnic cleansing campaign between the two sects that would subsequently go regional, whose casualty counts have tipped into the hundreds of thousands, and which is now bouncing back on Iraq? What other great power would have launched its invasion with plans to garrison that country for decades and with the larger goal of subduing neighboring Iran?
And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Because everybody wants to go to Baghdad, but real men want to go to Tehran.
That old Beach Boys song, Bomb Iran. Bomb, 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 bomb. Anyway,
only to slink away 8 years later, leaving behind a Shiite government in Baghdad that actually supports Iran. And in what other country could leaders viewing these events and knowing our part in them have been so imbued with goodness as to further draw red lines and to contemplate sending in the missiles and bombers again, this time on Syria and possibly even Iran?
I'll tell you one thing, unlike America, Israel seems to be able to fight wars very quickly. What is your secret? Because we don't seem to have the hang of that.
The secret is that we have America.
Yeah.
And America, you see, the point is that Israel...
Shut up!
What other country could magnanimously spend $4 to $6 trillion on two, quote, good wars, unquote, in Afghanistan and Iraq against lightly armored minority insurgencies without winning or accomplishing a single thing? And that's not even counting the funds sunk into the global war on terror and sideshows in places like Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen, or the staggering sums that, since 9/11, had been poured directly into the national security state.
How dare you?
How many countries possessing the finest fighting force in the history of the world have engaged in endless armed conflicts and interventions from the 1960s on and, except in unresisting Panama and tiny Grenada, never managed to definitively win anything?
How dare you?
And talking about exceptional records, what other military could have brought an estimated 3.1 million pieces of equipment ranging from tanks and Humvees to porta potties, coffee makers, and computers into Iraq and then transported most of them out again while destroying the rest or turning them over to the Iraqis? Where the U.S. military is now drawing down its forces and has already destroyed, quote, more than 170 million pounds worth of vehicles and other military equipment, unquote, what other force would have decided ahead of time to shred, dismantle, or simply discard $7 billion worth of equipment, about 20% of what it had brought into the country? The general in charge proudly calls this, quote, the largest retrograde mission in history, unquote. To put that in context, what other military would be capable of carrying a total consumer society right down to PXs, massage parlors, boardwalks, internet cafes, and food courts to war? Let's give credit where credit is due. We're not talking about retrograde here, folks. We're talking about an exceptional retrograde. What other military could, in a bare few years in Iraq, have built a staggering 505 bases ranging from combat outposts to one the size of small American towns with their own electricity generators, water purifiers, fire departments, fast food restaurants, and even miniature golf courses at a cost of unknown billions of dollars?
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns.
The department cannot account for $2.3 trillion in transactions in 1 year alone.
It is,
So that is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
How dare you?
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
There are known knowns.
Here comes the war criminal, Donald Rumsfeld! War criminal!
And then, only a few years later, abandon all of them, dismantling some, turning others over to the Iraqi military, or in ghost towns, and leaving yet others to be looted and stripped. And what other military in the same time period, thousands of miles away in Afghanistan, could have built more than 450 bases, sometimes even hauling in the building materials, and now be dismantling them in the same fashion? If those aren't exceptional, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what is.
I'll probably say it 3 more times. See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
In a world where it's hard to get anyone to agree on anything, the covert campaign of drone strikes that George W. Bush launched and Barack Obama escalated in Pakistan's tribal areas stand out. These hundreds of strikes not only caused significant numbers of civilian casualties, including women and children, while helping to destabilize a sometime ally, but it almost miraculously created public opinion unanimity. Opinion polls there indicate that a Ripley's Believe It or Not style 97% of Pakistanis consider such strikes, quote, a bad thing, unquote.
Want us to be safer, or do you want to feel good beating people up? Because those are the two choices.
I don't want to know what the American CIA is doing. I don't want to know. 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 I don't want to know.
And what other power could have secretly and illegally kidnapped at least 136 suspected terrorists, some in fact innocent of any such acts or associations, off the streets of global cities as well as from backlands of the planet? And what other nation could have mustered a coalition of the willing of 54 countries to lend a hand in its quote rendition unquote operations? We're talking about more than a quarter of the nations on planet Earth, people.
But wait! There's more!
And that isn't all. Oh no, that isn't all. Can you imagine another country capable of setting up a genuinely global network of black sites and borrowed prisons, with local torturers on hand, places to stash and abuse kidnappees and other prisoners in locations ranging from Poland to Thailand, Romania to Afghanistan, Egypt and Uzbekistan to U.S. Navy ships on the high seas, not to speak of that jewel in the crown of the offshore prisons, Guantanamo?
I will close Guantanamo.
Such illegality on such a global scale simply can't be matched. And don't even get me started on torture. It's fine for us to take pride in our exceptionalist tradition, but you don't want to pour it on, do you?
The answer is absolutely not.
How about the way the State Department, to the tune of $750 million, constructed in Baghdad the largest, most expensive embassy compound on the planet, a 104-acre Vatican-sized citadel with 27 blast-resistant buildings, an indoor pool, basketball courts, and a fire station, which was to operate as a command and control center for our ongoing garrisoning of the country and the region. Now, the garrisons are gone, and the embassy at Staff Cut is a global white elephant, but what an exceptional elephant. Think of it as a modern American pyramid, a tomb in which lie buried dreams of establishing a Pax Americana in the greater Middle East. USA! Match that sort of memorial thousands of miles from home.
I respect your idealism.
Or what about this? Between 2002 and 2011, the United States poured at least $51 billion into building up a vast Afghan military. Another $11 billion was dedicated to the task in 2012, with almost another $6 billion planned for 2013. Washington has also sent in a legion of trainers, tasked with turning that force into an American-style fighting outfit. At the time Washington began building it up, the Afghan army was reportedly a heavily illiterate, drug-taking, corrupt, and ineffective force that lost one-third to one-half of its personnel to casualties, non-reenlistment, and desertion in any given year. In 2012, the latest date for which we have figures, the Afghan security forces were still a heavily illiterate, drug-taking, corrupt, and inefficient outfit that was losing about one-third of its personnel annually, a figure that may even be on the rise. The United States and NATO allies are committed to spending $4.1 billion annually on the same project after the withdrawal of their combat forces in 2014. Tell me that isn't exceptional.
So we heard from you. You go away.
USA!
This is the HTV-2 hypersonic bomb that can travel at 20 times the speed of sound and strike anywhere in the world in under an hour with the impact of a nuclear bomb without the fallout. Each of these bombs costs $69 million and is designed like all other weapons to control others. After it is used, it leaves us poor, other people dead, and more power and profit to those that made it. There are only two kinds of people in this world, those that want to be left alone and those that won't leave you alone. Humanity has spent so much time on how to manipulate the world and relatively no time asking why. Would have humanity been vastly better off if we did not tax, steal, inflate our economic activities to pay for a $1 trillion military empire, to dominate the world's resources, to create unlimited debt and power for the elite that control our world? Or should we have just left the world alone, free to pursue whatever desires they wanted to do, and just took care of ourselves? Well, if you're indoctrinated into the belief that you have the right to inflict your view of the world onto others, then this is the weapon for you. You now have the ability to spread debt and death faster than anybody else in the world. You just better hope one day that somebody doesn't think that they have the same right to inflict their version of the world on you. We have a world today that has awesome technical knowledge to be able to develop a $69 million hypersonic autonomous kamikaze bombs that can strike anywhere in the world within minutes, and yet we have a society that cannot become conscious to the fact that they are slaves living depressing, malnourished, narcissistic little lives. Some would say that we need this indoctrination to make the world work, and that squatting on a mushroom thinking about man's relationship to the universe will never get us to the moon. Well, who cares if we can technically watch a 3D 80-inch high-definition TV, instantly downloading the latest Kardashian show, dressed in a Prada spacesuit while driving a Mercedes moon buggy on the moon? On your deathbed, will you be thinking about all the technical things that you were able to do, or the idealistic relationships and passions you did not pursue? I can tell you what Steve Jobs wished for. He wished he could have gotten to know his kids better. I never let schooling get in the way of my education. Mark Twain. And besides the fact, most of the great inventions that improved our quality of life were created by men that had none of this indoctrination. They were free thinkers and tinkerers who loved learning in a non-formalized environment. They pursued their God-given talents and desires for the betterment of others. Jonas Salk cured polio by following his passions and talents, and then he gave away the vaccine to the world without patent. He became the change in the world he wanted to see. Hell, there are no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something. Thomas Edison. And what are we really technically teaching kids today? Are we producing the next Edison, Ford, or Tesla? Or are we producing kids that will someday be held at war crimes tribunals saying that they were just technically following orders? The other problem with this technical line of thinking is that it gives humans the arrogant view that they can manipulate nature, and ultimately others, into our own personal utopia, never seeing the fact that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Keynesian economics is of this technical line of thought, and that it has been drilled into our heads that we can manipulate the world by just pulling enough economic levers. All of the technical progress we have made in war, communication, finance, government, and consumer gadgets are worthless if those lives that are building, consuming, and dying for these goods are soulless creatures who do not think for themselves. And what is the result of all this technical thinkers manipulating our world? We have rigged the world to blow with massive financial fraud that will technically end the world as we know it. And for what? Do we technically live better than we did 50 years ago? And by what measure? Happiness, obesity, education, divorce? We need the ability to ask why we do things and not how to technically do things. Maybe then we can ask why we should even build a hypersonic bomb. Does it make the world better? Who does it benefit? How would these resources be better used? And do we even have the right to take from some to destroy others? Without a greater sense of life behind our technical actions, we will continue this painful existence on Earth. You cannot change the outside world to become free or happy. You must change yourself to become free and happy. False flag operations are covert operations designed to deceive the public in order to make an attack look like some outside force carried it out. This gives a nation the ability to start a war and make it look like they were the victims. This is very important if the public does not want war, and it also limits the ability for opposing interests to stop the new war. Any opposition, foreign or domestic, would immediately be put in the same category as those that they claim did the false flag.
You're either with us or you're with the enemy.
False flags do not happen very often, but when they do, they change the paradigm we operate in. We all see how the world has been changed forever after 9/11. Before 9/11, we would not have put up with such a loss of privacy and a loss of liberty, much less a decade of war looking for weapons of mass destruction or men in caves.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
With the supposed death of Osama bin Laden and the supposed end of military actions in Iraq, I feel the decks are cleared for the next big event. Historically, false flags are military in nature, but I feel going forward they will morph into something much worse. Every system built on debt needs constant debt to be created, or the system implodes. If the criminal elite can expand the debt system through asset bubbles, then all is well. But what happens if they can't get more debt created? They need to either steal other assets to provide capital for the system, or they need a reason to create massive debts that the masses will sacrifice for. Wars do both. With war, the criminal elite can confiscate the natural resources of other nations and provide the context to create massive amount of new debt. Our paradigm is failing, and there is no fixing it. There is so much inequity built into the system at every level. The only answer is for a complete collapse. This collapse will leave a generational scar so large that humanity might never consider again fractional reserve banking or the war machine it enables. Until that collapse, the criminal elite will do what they have always done, create more debt and more wars. The criminal elite see their power paradigm collapsing on its own cancerous self. A silver default, debt ceiling doom, dollar collapse, peak oil, or whatever leads ultimately to the end of the Anglo-American petrodollar financial paradigm. The Anglo-American elite might need to pull off 3 false flags in order to fail forward. This might include the typical military false flag, an economic false flag, and an informational false flag. These dramatic measures will seem necessary to the criminal elite, and the horrific toll on humanity will be justified in their minds. This societal upheaval will be time for the criminal elite to settle all the threats to their power paradigm, much like the end of Godfather 1. The first of the three threats to their power is the death of the dollar. The dollar is the basis of all the criminal elite's power. Without it, or an equivalent of it, they have no means to create debt that enslaves nations, states, corporations, and citizens of the world. This debt money provides the criminal elite an unlimited checkbook to fund the world's most powerful military that controls the world's natural resources so that their corporations can harvest them. It also protects the shipping lanes that transports the rest of the world's trade. This debt money also buys political power for which the elite rig the game in their favor. And finally, the criminal elite used their money to own all the major media in order to distract the masses from the real problem in the world, the debt-based banking system, and the paradigm it finances. It is no secret that the dollar is going to die. It is a mathematical inevitability. Nothing can stop the ultimate collapse of the dollar. Our monetary system is based on debt, and in order for it to work, more debt needs to be created every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. If it does not happen, there will be a massive wave of defaults that would suck the system dry in a few weeks. The elite don't necessarily care if the dollar lives or dies. They just want to control the world's currency. They would ultimately like to have a global international currency that would be far away from pesky national politicians. So if the dollar is doomed, how can the criminal elite fail forward? They can create a financial crisis so incredible that desperate people would beg the elite to make the pain stop. They did this in 1907 to set the stage for the Federal Reserve. They did this in 2008 when they held up America for $700 billion. They will do it again and use the line of stability as the main reason why we should accept their new corrupt plan. I don't think that they could pull off something this large without a much larger distraction to silence the masses. The only thing big enough to scare the masses under the protective hug of the elite is another world war. This war can put an end to another threat of the current world order, the anti-hegemon. Non-Anglo-American nations like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, among others, have been gaining an incredible amount of power. I call these group of non-Anglo-American powers the anti-hegemon, as they have no uniting ideology, race, or religion, other than standing in opposition to the hegemonic power of the Anglo-American Empire. The anti-hegemon nations have so much to gain from a retreat of the Anglo-American Empire from the world stage. Countries like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, India, and many more, to a lesser extent like Japan, Korea, Germany, and France, have been on the losing end of the Anglo-American Empire for over a century. These nations have a history of Anglo-American losses like the Cold War, Opium Wars, Operation Ajax, the CIA attempted coup of Chavez, British colonization of India, apartheid, Hiroshima, the closing of the gold window by Nixon, and Waterloo. These are only some of the examples the Anglo-American elite have used in the past to ensure their supremacy. The Anglo-American elite have used every form of deceit to change or cheat the rules in pursuit of world domination. I believe the most likely event for a military false flag will be an American ship sunk in the Strait of Hormuz, supposedly by the Iranians. In order to understand this, it is imperative to understand the petrodollar. After Nixon took the dollar off the international gold standard, the Anglo-American elite devised a way to back the dollar with oil. Without going into too much detail, the plan was simply for their Arab partners to raise the price of oil dramatically and only sell their oil for dollars. They would then recycle all of those dollars back into the Anglo-American financial centers. So if you ever wondered why the Arab nations that called us the Great Satan gave us all their dollars, you now know why. The defense of this petrodollar standard has led us to invade Iraq when Saddam Hussein sold oil for euros, and Gaddafi in Libya when he proposed that he and other nations sell their oil for the new gold dinar. This is also why so many sanctions have been put onto Iran. The Iranians opened up their oil bourse in 2008 to sell their oil for anything but the dollar. An attack on an American warship would be exactly what Dick Cheney plotted to do in 2008 before he left office. Here is an insider's account of that meeting from the famed journalist Seymour Hersh.
That a few weeks later, a meeting took place in the vice president's office. Quote, the subject was how to create a casus belli between Tehran and Washington, he said. What you're writing there is that Cheney, there was a meeting in the White House where Cheney presided over, looking to cook up the next war, a false war based on false intelligence.
Among the items considered and rejected, which is why the New Yorker did not publish it, on grounds that it wasn't accepted. One of the items was, why not, there was a dozen ideas proffered, how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was why don't we in our shipyard, build 4 or 5 boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up. Might cost some lives, and it was ejected because you can't have Americans killing Americans. But that's the level of stuff we were talking about, provocation.
I don't even think that it necessarily be an American that pulls off this attack on the American ship. If you look at who's been pushing for war with Iran the most, it is Israel, and the neocons that got us into the last war. They proudly talk about how they get us to fight their wars. Here's a clip of Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu talking about their secret weapon.
But I'll tell you one thing, unlike America, Israel seems to be able to fight wars very quickly. What is your secret? Because we don't seem to have the hang of that.
The secret is that we have America.
Nah.
And America, you see, the point is that Israel...
If you think that that was just a slip, please look into Project for a New American Century, or the 1967 USS Liberty incident, where unmarked Israeli planes attacked and nearly sunk the most decorated ship in our fleet with the purpose of getting the United States to attack Egypt.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded.
Girls delightful in Cuba, stop. Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
That's fine, Mr. King. Yes, I rather like...
And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure.
There was a dozen ideas proffered how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard, build 4 or 5 boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up.
But I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
A false flag attack, like an American ship sunk in the Strait of Hormuz, would also keep Iranian allies like Russia and China at bay, much like the 9/11 attacks kept them from using their power to stop the United States from invading Iraq. The world is a much different place than it was in 2000, and China and Russia have learned a lot, as they have been vocal opponents of many of the pressures the Anglo-American empire has applied to Iran. If China does rise in opposition, that would be something the Anglo-Americans could easily turn the American public onto them too. Our horrible economic conditions are directly responsible to those that own and control our paradigm, the criminal elite in Washington and Wall Street. That being said, the criminal elite will blame all of the problems on anything else in the world except for them. China could have purposely been made into a threat only to take them down in the future. Let me first state that I am no fan of China. Their elite have human rights violations against their own citizens that would make you sick to your stomach. But let's be honest, China would not be a threat if our criminal elite did not build them up in the first place. Our military-industrial complex needs an enemy to justify their war machine. The war on terror was a good ride, but after almost a decade, it's getting a little old. Our banking system needed another country to buy our paper Ponzi scheme, and China became the most obvious target after Japan gorged itself on our debt. Our elites made deals with the Chinese elites to move our manufacturing overseas to use their slave labor and pollute their environment. The Chinese communists got all the technology and manufacturing and dollars to build up China as a threat. Our elite did this to make tremendous profits and keep the dollar paradigm going. But in the end, I believe that our criminal elite may use China to be the next enemy in a paradigm-shifting war. Since China has now said no more American debt, the Federal Reserve has stepped up as the buyer of last resort. This has bought us some time, but there's a huge economic difference of recycling dollars already in circulation, like the Chinese dollars, than freshly printed ones like that from the Federal Reserve. The Anglo-American elite must solve Triffin's dilemma, where a world currency reaches its apex and must be allowed to default, but somehow not drag down the rest of the world with it. The elite have been trying to get regional and ultimately global currencies in place to solve this dilemma. Now, no nation is going to give up their power to create money, especially now that we're looking at the euro imploding. The only option, I feel, is to do it the old-fashioned way, through war. The only thing the United States is really good at now is exporting debt and bombs. There is way too much at stake for our elite to just silently walk away into the night without a fight. They are trying to keep things going by now fighting 4, 5, 6 wars in the oil-rich Middle East and North Africa region. But the writing is on the wall. The debt ceiling will continue to be raised, and money and debt will be created, and the war machine will continue to churn. This will not end because the elite will say, we can't do this anymore. If anything, history has shown that when the chips are down on the table, they will double down and go off to war. The destruction of the dollar will either be the cause of war, or war will be the destruction of the dollar. If there is an economic false flag, like a massive treasury sell-off, then it could be a cause of war with China. Or if there is a military false flag, it will cause the dollar's destruction and force introduction of a new monetary paradigm, possibly a global currency. The elite will use this upheaval to destroy any competitors. In the smoking aftermath of the war, they will impose a new paradigm based off of the same destructive seeds of the old paradigm. There is a third threat to the elite's power paradigm that can and should stop all of this. Freedom of information. There is no doubt the internet has gotten away from the criminal elite and that their lies have been exposed.
As the #1 national hazard of attack on the homeland in West Virginia, in America, or anywhere else. So, I mean, it really almost makes you ask the question, would it have been better if we'd never invented the internet and had to use paper and pencil or whatever? And that's a stupid thing to say, but it has genuine consequence, because it's on the internet that these acts of shutting down, you know, they have the television saying that, ads every day saying that the Department of Defense is attacked 3 million times a day, and it's true. Everybody is attacked. Anybody can do it. People say, well, it's China and Russia, but there could be, you know, some kid in Latvia doing the same thing.
Small sites all over the internet have shown over and over again that the emperor has no clothes. I can see an informational false flag to coincide with the economic and military false flag. They can falsely blame China or domestic groups like Anonymous for massive internet shutdowns. I believe that big corporations will still have a functioning internet, but small informational sites will be shut down for sake of quote-unquote national security. Perhaps it could even be something much worse, where they shut down all free speech and opposition for the sake of national security. I have long advocated that individuals walk away from any collectivist answer that's thrown out there. I warned people against the Tea Party, saying that they would be infiltrated, subverted, and destroyed, and they were. I warned people against Occupy Wall Street, saying that it was a titanic waste of time. They don't care if we march on them, so long as we pay our taxes. I've advocated individuals walking away from the system because we empower them. They do not control us. I feel that we're entering a new era where the criminal elite are now going after individual voices out there. When we stop emotionally worrying about things outside of our control, and start logically working on the things inside of our life, we'll find more improvement, more empowerment, and better people to support us. This is truly the opposite consciousness solution that we're looking for. I feel that there's a subversive, secretive move by the government or the criminal elite to silence voices of truth. If you look at the persecution of people like Julian Assange, Bradley Manning, Ed Snowden, all people that took tremendous risks their own personal life for us to learn the truth. Then we saw the very mysterious deaths of Andrew Breitbart.
I've got videos. This election, we're going to vet him from his college days to show you why racial division and class warfare are central to what Hope and Change was sold in 2008.
I have always sensed the Obama birth certificate movement was a grand distraction and soon found out why. Michael Hastings.
It's not fun to have your 2-ton SUV's brakes hacked just as you're parking in front of a ditch.
Both of which were about to expose something the criminal elite did not want out.
Celebrated computer hacker Barnaby Jack died on July 25th. What makes this so strange, along with the Michael Hastings death, is Jack, who is most commonly known as the hacker who could force bank ATMs to spit out cash, was a genius at finding bugs in the tiny computers embedded in equipment such as medical devices and the aforementioned banking machines. The San Francisco Medical Examiner's Office gave no details on his death, but Jack was due to present his findings on the security vulnerabilities of implanted medical devices at the Black Hat Conference in Vegas. It was claimed that Jack had discovered a way to induce a heart attack in anyone with implanted heart devices, pacemakers, like you see here, from up to 30 feet away.
Now I feel that they're moving into another zone, and I believe Cass Sunstein is the intellectual father behind this. Cass Sunstein has been a longtime confidant of Barack Obama. In 2008, while at Harvard Law School, Cass Sunstein co-wrote a paper that proposed that the United States government employ teams of covert agents and pseudo-independent advocates to cognitively infiltrate online groups and websites, as well as other activist groups, and any other group that Cass Sunstein deems false conspiracy theories about the government. Cass Sunstein advocates that the government's stealth infiltration should be accomplished by sending covert agents into chat rooms, online social networks, and even in real space groups. He proposed that the government take secret payments to so-called independent credible voices to bolster the government's messaging. This program would target those advocating quote-unquote false conspiracy theories, which they define to mean an attempt to explain an event or practice by reference to the machinations of a powerful people who have managed to conceal their role. Now, there's no evidence that they actually are doing this, but all the little stories that I'm gathering around are all starting to make me think that this is actually happening. Look at the failed setups of Luke Rudkowski.
I'm making this video primarily for my safety, but to also possibly safeguard you from being set up. And just a few hours ago, I received an email on my old private high school email. Not my work email, not my We Are Change email, but my old high school email. And the email was from an unknown client. It was from a Tor email server, and it had an attachment, and it said something about a leak. Now, automatically knowing this, I had to find a new laptop. I found another laptop that wasn't connected to me, and I looked into this email. The email specifically stated that this person that was sending me this email was a whistleblower, was a leaker that actually attended the 2013 Bilderberg meeting, that he had raw JPEG pictures of everything that happened, of the attendees, and he wanted us to have the exclusive. He told us to download these pictures and to break the story to the world and show everybody what happened. Now, obviously, I was interested, and I scrolled down. Now, luckily, Yahoo email servers actually let you preview pictures before downloading them. And when I scrolled down, I actually saw graphic, horrible, inhumane pictures of child pornography.
And Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers.
Well, what happened is last night, somebody using a Tormail account impersonating me emailed Dan Johnson, and in the email it said, "Hey, I've got new resolutions for you that a team of lawyers and I put together, and here they are," and there were PDF attachments. Dan saw it was a Tormail account, realized it wasn't really for me, and did not open the attachments. but he did consult his security expert, and he was able to determine that there, in these PDFs, embedded inside of them, were child porn images. And so what this was is someone was trying to get Dan to open up these PDFs and download child porn onto his computer. And so that was a direct attack on him, but also attack on me because it purported to be from me and had my name embedded and Oathkeeper's name embedded in the files.
Both received child pornography through an email. And you know, this is like the lowest of the low attack when you have people trying to set other people up and, you know, attack their character. You know, these are truth tellers. And the problem with this is, had they not caught it, had they not come out and spoke about it, they could have very easily been tipped off, had an FBI raid their computers, and then because the way these emails were indexed, that it was very easy for the FBI to find it, and now they would be in jail and have their name ruined and cause all sorts of dissension. So I think people need to be very careful about, you know, obviously opening up these things. But if you are confronted by this stuff, you got to speak out. We're reaching an end here where they need to discredit the truth tellers before the next big thing happens. And again, the next big thing is the collapse of the dollar, the single largest event in human history. So this low blow tactic is an attempt to discredit the individuals speaking truth because they cannot attack the truth itself. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. Dr. Martin Luther King. And one other thing, listen, all our entire structure for the last 10 years has been focused on this fake war on terror. You know, the military-industrial complex, getting all these Americans to go out and essentially kill brown people halfway across the world that we'll never see. Now that they know the collapse is coming, they want to do something. They have to be able to control the motherland here, or the fatherland, or whatever, homeland, whatever collectivist name that they want to put on here. And I think it's going to cause massive dissension, and I don't think it's going to go very far. I'm not going to say that we're all going to end up in FEMA camps and stuff like that, because I think that the people that passively put up with the debt and death paradigm when it was, you know, brown people across the world, and yeah, we're getting oil, and, you know, I can still have my iPad. As soon as they start realizing that, Manning and Snowden and all these guys, they're not the bad guys. You know, they're the ones that are actually speaking out and taking tremendous pains going forward and speaking out. It's not easy for me to speak out. The easiest thing for me to be would just go off and go do something else. But when people start realizing, especially inside to make the machine work, realize that this isn't what they signed up for. They may have signed up to avenge 9/11, even though that was a total, false flag event. But the more that they try to do acts like this, the more that there's people inside the system that are going to say, not for me, and walk away, and expose, and whistleblow. And I think that's ultimately what's going to bring down the system when people stop actively or passively supporting it. The people are waking up, and they're far too clever to see through online trolls. So now they're resorting to sending child pornography in order to discredit the movement. As the days get closer to a financial collapse, I've always encouraged people to listen to all and follow none. I feel that there's going to be a lot of voices out there that are working to gain your trust, so at the time when everything is on the line, that they'll have enough credibility to steer you down the wrong path.
You have never had more solid evidence that Alex Jones is working for the bad guys than right here, right now.
But I had to hang up on the guy and delay him out, because there's no point in letting him put out his COINTELPRO. What's COINTELPRO? According to FBI records, COINTELPRO resources were expended on infiltrating, disrupting, marginalizing, and/or subverting groups suspected of being subversive. I can't tell you how many times I've just gone to any political event.
Constantly put on the defensive against the federal government. Every single time. Be it the FCC coming to town and trying to shut down our local micro broadcaster. Be it the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration coming to town and trying to shut down and train the police officers to do blood withdrawals. Be it the DATF now.
That's an example of COINTELPRO. Here's another great example of COINTELPRO.
You are not going to get away with your activities. You are not going to get away.
Hey, ladies, the Second and First Amendment. Get the hell out of my face.
I'm here to tell you right now
I mean, I almost started crying last night when I was at that demonstration and I saw these families bringing their children up to me for me to shake their hand, and I just look at their innocence.
He's trying to take over our rally that a lot of people worked on.
Is that once they cause all the infighting and division and problems, then everyone spends their time on that, and then you can't expand your organizations.
All right, is the freedom movement divided in Austin? Somebody doesn't want to play nice.
And every time I go to a big city and see provocateurs, I've seen it in Austin.
Are you ready?
That's COINTELPRO. Playing that against people, creating racial division, infiltrating groups, trying to radicalize them, trying to get people to commit acts of violence so they can put them in prison. And we're going to rouse and rise for humanity to identify who you are, and as you wage war against us, 1776!
I show the clips of all these guys who are obviously listening to Alex Jones going, oh, if Obama does it, I'm going to be the first one to fire the shot.
I'm telling you that if that happens, it's going to spark a civil war, and I'll be glad to fire the first shot. If it goes 1 inch further, I'm going to start killing people.
And then you got the guys that were over at the Bundy Ranch who actually murdered cops and put Gadsden flags on the dead bodies and said that this is the beginning of the revolution.
The suspects pulled the officers out of the booth and onto the ground, where they placed a Gadsden flag, which is a "Don't Tread on Me" yellow flag on the body of Officer Beck. They also threw a swastika on top of his body.
Jared Miller then pinned a note to one of the officers' bodies announcing that this was, quote, the beginning of the revolution.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
You have never had more solid evidence that Alex Jones is working for the bad guys than right here, right now. Because what he's doing, he's coming to a peaceful rally. He's trying to stir up violence.
They want to radicalize mainline libertarians, conservatives, so we can be politically demonized, so we don't become mainstream and take our country back. You know what it's like to go to sleep every night knowing you work for a bunch of psychotic killers and you bastards are probably going to end up killing me one day? You know what it's like knowing you've ruined my life? You know what it's like, you sons of bitches? I'm tired of your crap! When they bust a cap in my head, can you imagine what's going to happen? And that's their plan.
Us look like lunatics. Number one. Number two, he gets us divided amongst ourselves.
The reason I know is my dad came to the protest and I didn't notice him. Because the whole time I was there, I had like COINTELPRO poking me and getting in my face. They send in people to cause violence. They spread lies about you. I'm here being friendly.
We wanted to give you a speaking spot, but instead of working with us, you're yelling on
Well, you sitting here you're afraid of the enemy. That's a diversion. That's a diversion. Pure diversion. Wow. That's guilty. If you're not, that's guilty. That's guilty.
And now you are acting like it's appropriate to just come in here and climb right on top of us.
Don't worry. Like COINTEL. Exactly like COINTEL. Pretty awesome.
So you should be lifting us up and empowering us instead of holding us.
I wasn't lifted up or empowered.
When you see them demonizing people like Ron Paul, myself, and others, you know it is a COINTELPRO operation. We, the patriots, the constitutionalists, we're the good guys. We're trying to save the republic. And anybody that stands against that is a treasonous, traitorous, larcenous enemy of humanity. Period.
Either you're with us or you're with the enemy. There's no in between. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear.
But getting back to COINTELPRO, infiltrate your group, and we need to incite violence to run off reasonable pacifists in your group, and so we can have you arrested and, quote, break up your group. They also want to radicalize the message. This is in preparation for the financial collapse and maybe even Obama not leaving office. I mean, I'm telling you, this is so huge. There is a massive program, no exaggeration. It's got to be 50 times bigger than the Manhattan Project. They're trying to come to our houses and kill us. They're training to attack and beat and arrest and shoot and kill patriots. Get up! Get moving! You had to move it. No, he was to put us in camp. Yeah, this was my First Amendment. He was to put us in camp. She wants to put us in camp. She wants to put us in camp. Hey, she wants to put us. Watch out. Easy there. Put all terrorists in camp. You know you are good. You know, listening, that you're not COINTELPRO. Because that's how COINTELPRO works so well. I'm the real thing. Do you have any discernment out there?
How they're going to kill all of us, how they're going to accelerate the soft kill. I recognize you for what you are, you filthy trash. And I am here to energize the human spirit and light that fire that will burn your system into a pile of black slag.
Who else is at this level? Who else is opposing the globalists at this level? Who else is exposing them? Who else understands them? Who else? We have to go to the next level, and we have to be strong in case, knock on wood, we get sued. In case I get killed or imprisoned, this operation's got to continue.
And that radiation is coming towards the United States. Fox News, AP, AccuWeather. I'm right again. You support raping children with battery acid, with giant objects. That's in the Army report. If you don't speak out against it, if you don't go out against it, if you don't stand up against it, you support it. You support it. You support it. You are now child killers, child torturers. You are now aiding and abetting it. You are literally going to hell in a handbasket. Repent now. Repent now. I know your mustache is cool. You got little gold frame glasses. You scare me so bad. Oh, you scare. You scum. Scum. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Oh, it makes me sick, and I'm going to have to watch them when they blow up some federal buildings, prance around the very murderers as my savior, and all the cowards out there begging the government to give them proctology exams on the side of the highway. And the new order's like, act like a jellyfish coward and giggle at all reality. They're like, yes, yes. Anyways. Anyways, but the controller level ones are just like, know what they're doing. Pentagon's like, how do we get the jellyfish into total war? Dance around and prance. You can see Black Ops guys are just sitting back, cold-blooded. This will work well on them. Good. Increase dosages in water immediately. Send out trendy. And it's like, it's trendy liberal Angelina. You know how creepy it is to know I'm right? I see. I got the sunglasses, pal. Nauseous smell of burning flesh. Mentally ill. It's pathetic. You criminal scum. You filthy, degenerate scumbag. You are assaulting me. I know what's going on. This is normal. I am primitive. I am angry. I am violent. We are involved as men. Just cracking your brains out. Oh, you didn't know about that? Raping your daughter. They want you in the ditch. You do what we say or die. It's all theater, ladies and gentlemen.
I believe ultimately a wide-awake humanity will put an end to all these forms of treachery. We have the benefit of seeing the same playbook over and over again throughout history, and if they do try another false flag, it is imperative that we question the perceived reality and wake humanity up before we get marched off to another war. Our job is not necessarily to fight this evil. We only need to expose evil so it'll cease to have power. The real challenge is to show people that the good that they think they are doing is really evil, and they will no longer do it. We need to convince our fellow citizens that debt and war are evil, and we need to rid this scourge from humanity once and for all. The timing and order of all this is unknown, but just know that it's going to get dramatically worse before it gets any better. Every 80 years or so, a paradigm dies and a new one is born out of the ashes of the old. 80 years ago, we had the Great Depression and World War II, and this was the creation of our current paradigm. 80 years before that, we had the Civil War, and 80 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. So far, the United States has survived and has gone on to become a global superpower. This time around, we have the possibility of a Revolutionary War, a Civil War, or a World War, or a combination of all three. There is nothing in writing that says America will go on forever. In fact, given our horrible record on debt and war, this system deserves to die an awful death, so that humanity will never go back down this path again. Only then can we go about creating a new paradigm, one that resonates with who we are, built upon peace,
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Оглядывайтесь, мы вас не добили под Сталинградом, на Украине, в Беларуси.
For which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible.
Против нас и будете опять готовить нападение, мы так ухнем, что...
Justice for all.
As we enter the conflict zone between the paradigms, the Anglo-American Empire will realize too late that they have been fighting the last war. This current paradigm was built on debt and death. The Anglo-American Empire won the last paradigm with its superior state capitalism, cranking out the most military hardware and leveling every other economic challenger. They then set about spreading debt all over the world to secure that position for the rest of the century. Ideas are more powerful than bombs, and this new war will be fought with real wealth and ideas. We will see that the war never stopped, and that they're close to winning.
Imagine to peer across the world and know the enemy's secrets, to place our thoughts into the minds of your leaders. Make your teachers teach the true version of history, your soldiers attack on our command. We will be everywhere at once, more powerful than a whisper, invading your dreams, taking your thoughts for you while you sleep. We will change you, Dr. Jones. All of you, from the inside. We will turn you into us. And the best part, you won't even know it's happening.
What good is the most powerful army in the world if the population that they seek to conquer is intellectually opposed to the repression and has very powerful nations backing them up? What good is the most powerful army in the world if their soldiers are tired of wars based on lies, and their paychecks bounce, and their pensions destroyed? What good is an economic system that has destroyed free market capitalism with state capitalism of fascism? What good is America if we've been systematically turned away from our Constitution and degenerated into socialistic, communistic wards of the state? What if the debts that we have incurred are now too large to defeat any enemy? What if the battle was already lost before the first bullet was fired? What if this was planned all along?
What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriot. Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world, that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C.
In Vietnam, we had heard that we had to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese to win the war. This is true because if a populace does not willingly accept the power, they will cause too much trouble to keep that power. While the U.S. has successfully used bullets and bombs to force power onto other nations, we have been systematically destroyed from the inside with collectivist thought. So much so that our power elite have become full-fledged fascists, and the millions of those that depend on the state are full-fledged socialists. This vice between the top and bottom has purposely been done to destroy the American middle class that creates all the wealth in this country. The way to crush the bourgeoisie, or the middle class, is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existent basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages in all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner that not one man in a million can diagnose. John Maynard Keynes. We're all Keynesians now. Richard Nixon. With the Anglo-American Empire intellectually, economically, politically in shambles, the anti-hegemon simply has to follow the very successful model of empire that the West has used for centuries. Expand trade and business relationships, secure the resources through contracts or force, offer cover to nations that toe the line and consolidate power to the top. The anti-hegemon will be successful because they are offering peace and trade versus bullets and bombs, knowing all along that they're intellectually no different than the fascists that the Anglo-American Empire represents. How this conflict is ultimately resolved is yet to be determined. I have done videos about the Anglo-American Empire and how they could do 3 false flags to fail forward to try to extend their winning streak by starting a World War III.
I mean, how do you solve a problem where you're spending 10% of, you're running a 10% fiscal deficit? You're not going to get growth in the absence of private sector credit demand. So the government's idea right now is we're going to export our way out of this. And when I asked a senior member of the Obama administration last week, how are we going to grow exports if we won't allow nominal wage deflation? And he says, we're just going to kill the dollar. And I said, okay, more you mean.
Or we could wake up one day and the dollar totally destroyed because the world no longer wants to hold our dollar, and they'll embrace the new hegemon. One thing is certain, this way of life is done. And the only way to transfer your wealth from this way of life to the next one is through real assets like silver.
Let me begin by making just a thumbnail definition of the geopolitical context in which we all find ourselves, including America. And in my perspective, that geopolitical context is very much defined by two new global realities. The first is that global political leadership, by which I mean the role of certain leading powers in the world, has now become much more diversified, unlike what it was until relatively recently. Relatively recently still, the world was dominated by the Atlantic world, as it had been for many centuries. It no longer is. Today, the rise of the Far East has created a new, but much more differentiated global leadership. One which, in a nutshell, involves, if one can hazard, an arbitrary list of the primary players in the world scene: the United States, clearly, maybe next to it, but maybe, the European Union. I say maybe because it is not yet a political entity. certainly increasingly so, and visibly so, China, Russia, mainly in one respect only, because it is a nuclear power co-equal to the United States, but otherwise very deficient in all of the major indices of what constitutes global power. Behind Russia, perhaps individually, but to a much lesser extent, Germany, France, Great Britain, Japan, certainly, although it does not have a politically assertive posture. India is rising. And then in the background of that, we have the new entity of G20, a much more diversified global leadership, lacking internal unity, with many of its members in bilateral antagonisms. That makes the context much more complicated.
While the criminals that sit at the top of the Anglo-American Empire and the anti-hegemon would love to have this new Hegelian dialectic between the two of them so that they could divide up the spoils of the world, there is one more power out there that they both fear more than each other, and that is a wide-awake humanity refusing to play along in this game anymore.
The other major change in international affairs is that for the first time in all of human history, mankind is politically awakened. That's a total new reality. Total new reality. It has not been so for most of human history until the last 100 years. And in the course of the last 100 years, the whole world has become politically awakened. And no matter where you go, politics is a matter of social engagement, and most people know what is generally going on in the world, and are consciously aware of global iniquities, inequalities, lack of respect, exploitation. Mankind is now politically awakened and stirring. The combination of the two, a diversified global leadership, politically awakened masses, makes a much more difficult context for any major power, including currently the leading world power, the United States. That for the first time in human history, for the first time in all of human history, almost all of mankind is politically awake. And these new and old major powers face still yet another novel reality, in some respects unprecedented. And it is that while the lethality of their power is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. I once put it rather pungently, and I was flattered that the British Foreign Secretary repeated this, as follows. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally. It was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. It is easier to kill than to control.
Now more than ever, people are starting to see that things that cannot go on forever won't. We cannot go into debt forever. Debt is rising on all levels of our life. Federal, trade, state, local, personal, corporate, student, mortgage, credit card, automotive debt is at all-time highs. We cannot have 100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. We cannot keep 0% interest rates and print money without destroying the dollar. We cannot continue to have rising health, food, and fuel costs. We cannot have endless, senseless wars and over 700 American military bases overseas. We cannot have 85 million baby boomers retiring at the same time to start taking from the generational Ponzi scheme. We cannot have manufacturing shipped overseas, 20% plus unemployment, and 45 million people on food stamps. We cannot have wide open borders with 25 million illegal immigrants. We cannot have half of Americans obese and 27 million Americans on antidepressants. We cannot continue to have banker bailouts, high-frequency trading, or flash crashes. We cannot have just-in-time delivery that only allows 3 days worth of food and 7 days worth of fuel. We cannot continue having failing schools indoctrinating our kids. We are living at a unique period in human history, and all things that cannot go on forever won't. This period will end, and it will result in an unimaginable upheaval in every aspect of your lives. In fact, I'm willing to bet that if you're here right now, it already has. The bad news is, it is unfortunately going to get much worse before it gets any better. The good news is that you are here today, and it is not too late to become aware of the big picture and start preparing to thrive and not just survive. Things that cannot go on forever won't. It has a mathematically inevitable end. Our debt-based monetary system must create more debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before, or it will completely collapse. I will cover this very important fact in much more detail later, but it is essentially we must inflate or die. We are reaching a mathematical end of this paradigm, which will either end in a hyperinflationary depression or an outright default. I have a very good idea on how this will play out and what to do about it, but for now let's concentrate on the fact that it cannot go on forever. The irresistible force paradox asks what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Our way of life is dependent on the absolute necessity of creating more debt every year, and it is an unstoppable force that drives humanity. The immovable object is the natural limit to the world. There's only a certain amount of resources that all this money can chase after. There is also a limit to the amount of wealth the top 0.1% can accumulate without tipping the world into revolution. There is also a limit to the amount of lies people will believe to keep the system going. The immovable object, in short, is reality. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of reality. Ayn Rand. There is no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. The alternative is whether only the crisis should come sooner as a result of the voluntary abandonment of further credit expansion, or later as a final total catastrophe of the currency system is involved. Ludwig von Mises. Our entire way of life is based off of a debt-based currency that must create more debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. This is because every dollar that comes into existence is debt, with a certain amount of interest attached to it. When debt is created, money is created. When debt is paid off, money is destroyed. The real trick is that the money that is owed for the interest does not exist, since only the principal of the loan is ever put into the economy. The only way that this interest can be paid is by more debt being created to pay for the previous debt and interest. This is why we have an ever-expanding exponential growth in debt that cannot be stopped. In the end, we're all dead. John Maynard Keynes. The dollar collapse is a mathematically inevitable event. It will be the single largest event in human history. At some point, the debt incurred will be more than the real economy can bear, and there will be a default of non-payment. Or the other way to default on that payment is that we constantly print more money to keep the system going, so much so that we eventually destroy the value of the currency and people lose faith in it, which leads to a rush out of that currency and into a hyperinflationary depression. One key aspect of this default is that nations that owe debt to foreigners simply default on the debt, like Greece will eventually do. But those nations like ours, that print our own debt-based currency, have every single time paid the debt with an increasingly worthless currency, to the point that we reach a hyperinflation.
And we can guarantee cash benefits as far out and at whatever size you like, but we cannot guarantee their purchasing power.
When one realizes this foundation of our entire way of life has cancer, the debt, the dollar, the economy, the stocks, the real estate, the pensions, our entire current unsustainable way of life ends. We can, at this late date, have a deflationary crash or a hyperinflationary depression. Nothing is written in stone. We can have a deflationary depression if the politicians stop creating more debt and refuse to raise the debt ceiling. With no more debt coming into the system, we would have the mother of all margin calls the world over, almost immediately. The highly leveraged world of banking would be forced to deleverage to meet their debt obligations. This would seize the markets and the economy as a whole, and it would happen within a matter of a few days. Austerity is another way deflation can happen. When nations restrict the amount of money spent into the economy by cutting services and payments, it limits the amount of money in circulation. Since the interest money is still sucking from the real economy, and there is no more money coming back in as this deflationary action on the economy grinds to a halt, and those most dependent upon those payments will be screaming the loudest. The masses will beg and fight for more spending, and eventually the politicians will cave and give the masses what they want, more money. Every country that engages in austerity will abandon it as political pressure grows, and the fact that with less government money in the system, the more the Keynesian parasitical system will collapse. Tax revenues shrink faster than the spending cuts, and this will increase the deficits. This is a ploy that the bankers benefit from, because austerity really means sacrificing the masses' lives so that the bankers' portfolios can perform. The politicians play this dangerous gambit because they want the people to beg them for more money. The game they play with the whiff of deflation and then opening up the money spigots is a very successful dialectic that has empowered this parasitical ruling class for ages. We could also have a deflationary depression if a nation like Greece defaults and the ECB does not flood the system with more euros to cover the losses in the system. By Greece defaulting on their debts, the banking system would seize up as banks become blatantly insolvent, as their equity positions are destroyed. This again would force everyone to sell their assets in a cascading mess to cover their losses. The deflation in the system is the most immediate and destructive choice. It is easy to find out who caused it, and it's difficult for people's confidence to return after it starts. This is why the Fed and the ECB have been furiously working on acronym schemes like QE1 and 2, Operation Twist, LTRO, and the Fed's secretive $16 trillion slush fund that supports insolvent zombie banks and the system they hold up. Once the ECB starts covering the losses in the banking system, this will give cover to all other Western central banks to print as these currencies fall relative to one another. Trillions will start flowing and the world will be rocked just as it was in 2008. But this time it will not be billion-dollar institutions that are broken. This time around it will be trillion-dollar nations and quadrillion-dollar markets. The dollar collapse will be the single largest event in human history. This will be the first event that will touch every single living person in the world. All human activity is controlled by money. Our wealth, our work, our food, our government, even our relationships are affected by money. No money in human history has had as much reach in both breadth and depth as the dollar. The dollar is the de facto world currency. All other currency collapses will pale in comparison to this big one. All other currency crises have been regional, and there have been other currencies for people to grasp onto. This collapse will be global, and it will bring down not only the dollar, but all other fiat currencies, as they are fundamentally no different. The collapse of currencies will lead to the collapse of all paper assets, and the repercussions to this will have incredible results worldwide. Thanks to globalization and the giant vampire squids of the Anglo-American Empire, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. It supports the world economy in settling foreign trade, most importantly the petrodollar trade. The money is then recycled through the City of London, not to be confused with London, and Wall Street. This fuels corporate vampires that acquire and harvest the world's wealth. The corporate powers then suppress real assets like natural resources and labor to provide themselves massive profits. This fascist, statist, collectivist model provides the money into the economy to fund an ever-increasing federal government. The government then grows larger and larger, enriching its minions with jobs to control their fellow citizens. Finally, to come full circle, the government then controls other nations through its military-industrial complex. This cycle will be cut when the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar happens. In order for our debt-based money to function, we must increase debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before, or we will enter a deflationary death spiral. When debt is created, money is created. When debt is paid off, money is destroyed. There is never enough to pay off the debt because there would not be $1 in existence. We are at a point where we will either default on the debt or create more money in debt to keep this cycle going. The problem is, if you understand anything about compounding interest, we are reaching a hockey stick moment where the more debt that is incurred, the less effective it is, and this leads us to hyperinflation. There are only two actors needed for this hyperinflation: the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve, and the spender of last resort, the government. These two can and will blow up the entire system. I believe that they will wait until the next crisis and the whiff of a deflationary depression before they fire up the printing presses. That crisis is coming very soon, as we can only kick the can down the road so long. Money and emergency measures will be worn out. The fact that none of the underlying problems that caused the 2008 crisis have been resolved. The only thing different from the 2008 crisis is that instead of corporate problems, we now have national problems. In this movie, Greece will play the role of Lehman Brothers, and the United States will play the role of AIG. The problem is there is nowhere to kick the can down the road, and there is no world government to absorb the debt yet. This leads me to the top 5 places not to be when the dollar collapses. Number 1 on this list, I believe, is Israel. This Anglo-American beachhead into the Middle East was first conceived by the most powerful family in the world, the Rothschilds, in 1917. The Balfour Declaration said that there would be a Zionist Israel years before World War II and the eventual establishment of Israel. Israel has not been a good neighbor and has always had the biggest bullies on the block at its back. When the dollar collapses, the United States will have much more on its plate, both domestically and internationally, to worry about this non-strategic piece of land. This will leave Israel very weak at a time when tensions will be high. This very thin strip of desert land will not be able to stand the economic reality of importing its food and fuel, or the political reality of being surrounded by nations that don't care for it. Second on this list, I feel, is Southern California. The land of fruit and nuts turns into battlefield Los Angeles. 20 million people packed into an area that has no food and water is not good, to say the least. Throw on top of it huge wealth disparities and the proximity to a narco state, and this does not bode well. We have seen the riots for Rodney King, but what will happen when the dollar is destroyed and food and fuel stop coming into this area? Number 3 on this list is London. The land of Big Brother and the former empire of the worldwide slave and drug trade will suffer heavily. The stiff upper lip that the British elite ingrained in their subjects will not work anymore as the British population explodes. People will sacrifice and unite for any foreign enemy, but not if that enemy has always been the British elite. The Anglo-American Empire may pull off another false flag to distract its population on another Emmanuel Goldstein like in 1984, but I feel this collapse will happen before they can pull it off. This will make all eyes point at the British elite as solely responsible for this catastrophe. We have seen massive riots for soccer matches with hooligans. What will happen when the food and fuel gets shut off to this tiny island? Number 4 on this list is New York City, another large urban area living too high on the dollar hog. New York City is the area I moved out of in 2008. There's little doubt that all of the wealth in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut is a derivative off of Wall Street wealth. The savings and investment for an entire nation and much of the world flows through that financial capital. As the world wakes up to the massive financial fraud, this could lead to the destruction of capital like you've never seen before. This will have tremendous effects on the regional economy as people driving Mercedes suddenly wonder where their next meal is coming from. The fifth and final place not to be when the dollar collapses is your local metropolitan area. Urban areas in general are a very bad place to be during currency collapses. Too many people packed into tight areas, totally unprepared and dependent upon a dollar paradigm is the last place you want to be when the dollar collapses. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Ayn Rand. To sum it up, those areas that lived highest on the hog in the dollar paradigm will most likely be the worst places to live when the dollar collapses. Most that live in urban areas will probably pass this off as doom and gloom, but rest assured, this dollar collapse is happening. It is a mathematical inevitability. We will not be as fortunate as to muddle through this collapse like we did in 2008 when it was a corporate problem. This time around it is a national or a global problem. The global Ponzi scheme has run out of gas as demographics decline, as abundant cheap oil declines, as our global power declines. This comes at a time when we reach our exponential or collapse phase of our money. The irresistible force paradox says, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? We are about to find out when infinite money hits a very finite world. America is still deep in denial, which is the first stage of the awakening. This denial will be wiped away when the dollar collapses. For now, the economy is still functioning and food and fuel are still available. The lights turn on and American Idol is still the center of attention. Americans still have the illusion of wealth and normalcy. They are still stuck in the false left-right paradigm and think that some other sock puppet will turn things around. When the dollar collapses, all American illusions will collapse with it. Deep denial will turn into deep anger. The violence I expect in all urban areas in the United States will make all other global riots pale in comparison. America is deeply infused with arrogance, denial, narcissism, drugs, and violence. There is no other society that I know of that has the degree of intensity and combination of these factors. So here are the 5 reasons why American riots will be the worst in the world. Number 1, arrogance.
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power. And I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.
All of our lives we've been fed the lie that somehow we are better than everybody else. We believe this so much that we feel it's morally acceptable to stick our noses in everybody's business. We have 777 military bases all over the world. Our currency is the world's reserve currency. We control most of the international organizations like the UN, IMF, and World Bank. We control the world's shipping lanes. Our media is the most popular and sought-after propaganda in the world. Our corporations harvest the resources that our empire provides. This has led to the feeling that the American way of life is not negotiable. We print debt and we consume. This way of life was only possible by the very real and hard sacrifices made by Americans long dead. America today is nothing more than a spoiled brat blowing through the last of its inheritance. The only thing that the United States is number one at is spreading debt and death. This American arrogance will be turned on to other Americans as the dollar collapses. We will no longer be able to maintain a global empire of force without a functioning currency. All of our troops will be forced to come home, and we will no longer be able to import 25% of the world's oil. This sudden shift will turn arrogant Americans on each other as they seek to enforce their inflated sense of self-worth onto others. They will think that the world somehow owes them something, and they believe that lesser people should be made to sacrifice for them. After all, Dick Cheney did say the American way of life is not negotiable. Everything is fine today. That is our illusion. Voltaire. The second factor, and what will make American riots the worst, is denial. For those that aren't arrogant, they are in denial, and somehow they will be okay as they are good people. They believe that America will recover and the American dream is still alive. They believe this because they either lack the ability to logically see through the lies, or they believe that people ruling them have the same morals as they do. You cannot spread freedom with war. A nation cannot enforce their will upon another nation any more than you can enforce your will upon another. There will always be blowback, and of course that is the plan of your rulers. They do not share the same values as you do. They seek to create chaos and division so that they can garner more power and profits. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Ayn Rand. The dollar collapse will end the ability of the average American to deny their active or passive participation in the dominance of the world by spreading debt and death. When people's entire life savings are wiped away, they will wonder what their life has been all about. All of the missed times with their family, connections with others, have been stained by the pursuit of material gains. Only when everything is taken from them will they start to see the real importance of life. Many will not be able to come to terms with this coming reality. Those that are aware and prepared stand a great chance of making it through this paradigm shift and thriving. Number 3 on the list is narcissism. The amount of narcissism in America is epidemic. The fascination with celebrities and their clothes consumes so many women. Men are addicted to worshiping sports figures. We have a fear of competition, and we view others as enemies. This leads to shallow and transitory relationships. Americans consume their way into debt as they try to create an outer facade to hide the inner void in their vapid lives. The baby boomer generation is known as the me generation. Their obsessive pursuit of material possessions was matched by their embrace of debt. The dollar collapse is going to hit the baby boomers the hardest, as they're forced to come to terms with the trail of pain that they have left in their wake. Broken families and debt are just the tip of the iceberg. The war and the debt machines they enabled and unleashed upon the world is a much harder reality that they will have to deal with. The real problem is the sad fact that most of them will be too old to get a second chance on life. Number 4, drugs. Millions of Americans have turned to drugs to fill the void of their true purpose in their lives. Instead of dealing with a past hurt or seeking a higher purpose in their lives by helping others and using their natural talents to make the world better, people turn to drugs. The worst kind of drugs are the ones that people believe that are making them better. Powerful psychotropic drugs like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or more commonly known as SSRIs or antidepressants. These drugs are extremely powerful and can cause psychotic breaks that lead to violence if they come off them too soon. I would say that these drugs are much more powerful than guns because they cause people to break from reality and cause violence. I don't have time just yet to go into the mass medication of America or the real reason why marijuana is illegal. But I do want to warn everybody of one thing. Nearly 10% of the country, or 27 million Americans, are on these antidepressants. Knowing that there is only a 1-month supply